Nitric oxide, miracle molecule or aging accelerant? Our story on methylene blue begins in a place you might not expect, looking at a molecule often hailed for its miraculous benefits. Unbeknownst to the most of its advocates, it's actually a toxic component of air pollutant called nitric oxide. While writing this, I am reminded of the famous 1984 film The Karate Kid, in which the very first karate lesson Mr. Miyagi taught to his student Daniel was how to wash and wax a car. In future lessons, Daniel was taught how to sand the floor, paint fences, and catch flies with chopsticks. Not surprisingly, Daniel was confused about why he was being taught skills that seemed entirely unrelated to karate. But in time, Daniel realized that everything had a purpose. Mr. Miyagi's unique brand of martial arts taught Daniel important lessons like muscle memory, patience, focus, and precision that he would later use to become a master of his craft. Similarly, there is no way that you can fully comprehend or appreciate methylene blue without first understanding the role of nitric oxide in health and disease, and how it relates to the body's metabolism. That's why I've dedicated part 1 of this book to nitric oxide and the origins of disease. Once you grasp the physiological role of nitric oxide in the body, the reason why methylene blue dye is a shining star among medicines will become clear. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of coffee, and enjoy the ride. How the drug Viagra flipped nitric oxide research on its head. In 1980s and prior, the compound nitric oxide was well understood by scientists to be a toxic free radical found in city smog. Then suddenly, according to Dr. Raymond Peat, around the year 1990, publishing activity in scientific journals began occurring in droves, claiming that nitric oxide was not only safe, but highly beneficial for an endless list of applications, including erectile function, heart function, and as a stroke preventative. In 1992, nitric oxide was proclaimed Molecule of the Year. The high volume of research and acclaim for nitric oxide around the time led to the FDA approval and launch of the drug Viagra for the treatment of erectile dysfunction in 1996. Viagra came out, and suddenly the medical publications came out finding it was the most glorious protective substance, said Pete. The pharmaceutical companies had succeeded in convincing scientists and the public at large that nitric oxide was no longer a toxic free radical, but a miraculous healing substance that could improve human health in myriad ways, solely to market and reap enormous profits from their latest blockbuster drug. But what does Viagra do? What does Viagra have to do with nitric oxide, you might ask? Prescribed to millions of men for erectile dysfunction, Viagra acts by elevating nitric oxide levels in the body. Put simply, Viagra is a nitric oxide antagonist. Such is the link between nitric oxide and the erection drug, Viagra. But how could boosting nitric oxide be beneficial for sexual health of men when it is known to decrease the fertility hormone testosterone? If nitric oxide is so helpful for cardiovascular health, then why is the nitric oxide inhibitor, L-name, beneficial in the treatment of patients with refractory cardiogenic shock? Lastly, why does lowering nitric oxide provide a striking survival benefit in lung cancer and pancreatic cancer patients? Type nitric oxide into the search engine, and you'll be inundated with studies and information from scientists, doctors, and a multitude of companies selling nitric oxide supplements and pro-drugs touting nitric oxide as a miracle material with virtually endless lists of benefits. You might also notice that around 95% of the information that emerges on the first few pages of any search engine regarding nitric oxide colors it in a positive light that would make the reader think it's one of the most health-promoting substances available. But buried deep within the digital trash heap known as the internet, there exists no shortage of evidence to the contrary, which in my opinion is far more compelling and scientific. In this chapter, I'm going to make the case that nitric oxide is not the health panacea that drug company researchers and marketers of nitric oxide promoting supplements would have you believe. My position is that nitric oxide is part of the body's stress response fundamental to the aging process and virtually all chronic degenerative diseases, including diabetes, cancer, heart disease, stroke, and dementia. If this chapter casts even a modicum of skepticism into your preconceived notions about nitric oxide, then it has succeeded. Softening our beliefs and admitting we could be wrong is the essential first step to learning anything new and moving in the direction of truth. If the information I'm about to present conflicts with your beliefs about nitric oxide, I ask that you keep an open mind about it. If you find yourself feeling angry at any point, let me remind you that we cannot make any scientific progress when we don't allow ourselves to explore new ideas. Try the information on like you would try on a new jacket. This seems like a good place to drop a quote from one of the great philosophers of the years past. It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Aristotle. With that in mind, and in the spirit of curiosity, I present to you the case against nitric oxide. Nitric oxide, a toxic free radical. Nitric oxide is a signaling molecule that's produced naturally by the human body, and it is also present in the Earth's environment in the form of industrial pollution. Chemically, nitric oxide is a colorless gas and a free radical. What's a free radical? I'm glad you asked. A free radical is any molecule that has an unpaired electron, which means that it's highly reactive with other chemicals and cellular structures inside the body. Virtually all known toxic environmental chemicals are free radicals as well, including heavy metals like lead, aluminum, or arsenic, plastic compounds like bisphenol, and an ionizing and non-ionizing radiation emitted by baby monitors, internet routers, cell phones, and x-rays, as well as a litany of different deleterious chemicals found in drugstores, soaps, shampoos, deodorants, and sodium lauryl sulfates. Free radicals are basically nasty little chemicals that go around stealing electrons off other molecules in your body, and that causes damage in your body, describes Dr. Emma Beckett, molecular nutritionist at the University of Newcastle in Australia. A balance between free radicals and antioxidants in the body is necessary for proper physiological function. Excessive concentrations of free radicals can overwhelm the body's ability to neutralize them and contribute to diseases like cancer, heart disease, cognitive decline, vision loss, and virtually all other disease pathologies. In 1956, after noticing that the concentration of free radical oxidants in the body gradually increases with age, Dr. Denham Harman proposed the free radical theory of aging. Harman's theory suggests that free radicals cause damage from cumulative oxidative stress, resulting in aging and death. Currently, the evidence backing up this theory is so widespread that at this point, most scientists see the association as self-evident. In 1998 review of the research on the free radical theory of aging, nitric oxide was labeled a damaging oxidant. It was said that the nitric oxide synthesis, INOS, is a primary enzyme that stimulates nitric oxide production, must be seen as a potential source of damaging oxidants. Also mentioned by the scientists was the fact that nitric oxide reacts with O2, a form of pre-oxynitrate, ONOO negative. Itself is a powerful oxidant. The opposites of oxidants like nitric oxide are antioxidants. Antioxidants are the only things that can give up an electron to that reaction without becoming free radicals themselves. So they're halting that negative charge reaction, stated Dr. Becker. Said differently, antioxidants selflessly donate an electron to oxidants, which prevents them from stealing an electron from healthy cells or tissues. The result is that the body is chemically stabilized. Vitamin C and vitamin E are two examples of antioxidants that can protect us against environmental chemicals. But you already knew that. One less commonly known example of antioxidant is urea, found in urine. This is why, for thousands of years, as described by Roman poet Ovid, women have been splashing mule urine on their faces to promote more youthful skin. Think that's gross? Take a look at the ingredients list on the bottle of your face cream. If it's a quality product, it probably contains urea. To sum things up in one sentence, free radicals cause damage, and antioxidants protect against damage. As with most things, any excess can cause harm, so once again, balance is key. Let's return to our subject of nitric oxide now. Given the fact that most people are exposed to an excess of free radicals daily in the form of environmental chemicals in food, water, air, plastics, and drugstore personal care products, does it sound like a good idea to further increase free radicals in the body by taking nitric oxide promoting drugs or supplements like Viagra or L-arginine? Nitric oxide for bodybuilding. For decades, the bodybuilding world has been promoting nitric oxide for its ability to dilate or relax constricted blood vessels, claiming an increase in nutrient and oxygen delivery means that you'll be able to exercise for longer, no matter what your sport is, wrote Casey Walker on his blog, My Protein. An article on bodybuilding.com offers 6 vein-popping reasons to use nitric oxide supplements, including increased recovery rates, reduced fatigue levels during high-rep protocols, enhanced endurance performance, increased availability of energy, increased glucose use, increased muscle pump. All these benefits sound fantastic, but let me remind you that we're talking about a toxic air pollutant here. How could a toxic free radical contained within the thick smog spewed from the tailpipe of a gas-guzzling SUV be beneficial for muscle performance and recovery? The fact that increased muscle pump is part of that list alone should be enough to sound the alarm as to whether or not it's physiologically beneficial. The feeling of inflamed or tight muscles, for which Arnold Schwarzenegger has coined the term the pump, is caused by increased lactic acid production in cells. Elevating lactic acid levels is the exact opposite of what we want for both muscle performance and good health in general. Lactic acid is well known to suppress the immune system, trigger the release of stress hormones like cortisol, reduce carbon dioxide production causing blood vessels to constrict, and dominantly promotes cancer growth and metastasis. I'll discuss nitric oxide's vasodilatory effects shortly, but first I'd like to shine some light on the impact of misconceptions about nitric oxide on the bodybuilding world. As a result of rigged science by the pharmaceutical companies pushing the erection drug through the FDA approval process, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of different allegedly performance-enhancing bodybuilding supplements on the market containing the amino acid arginine. Consuming more arginine, whether in the form of food or supplements, like pure arginine powder or high arginine super beet supplements, will provide the base material from which nitric oxide is synthesized, increasing the amount of nitric oxide produced by your body. Many bodybuilders consume these products believing they're doing themselves a favor and improving their workouts, but unfortunately they fall into a dangerous myth. Anybody who thinks nitric oxide is good for exercise, muscle performance, or sexual function should look at the following study from 2015, which shows that elevated nitric oxide levels powerfully inhibits testosterone. In the experiment, scientists looked at the effects of nicotine on testosterone levels in male rats. One group of rats received nicotine, and the other received nicotine and a nitric oxide inhibitor called L-name. After 30 days of administrations, the rats were assessed and their testosterone levels measured. The study showed that testosterone was significantly decreased in the group that received the nicotine alone, but in the group that received nicotine as well as a nitric oxide inhibitor, testosterone levels were significantly higher. In other words, elevated nitric oxide stimulated by the nicotine decreased testosterone levels. By taking a nitric oxide inhibitor in addition to nicotine, testosterone levels were maintained. Another experiment, looking specifically at the effects of nitric oxide on steroidogenesis, came to a similar conclusion. Therefore, if you want your body to produce sufficient testosterone, whether for bodybuilding or general health, it's important you follow these strategies. Eat nitrate-free meat. Eat vegetables not heavily fertilized with nitrogen. Avoid bodybuilding supplements that include nitric oxide precursors like arginine and erection drugs. Another nitric oxide precursor that's heavily promoted in the bodybuilding world is the amino acid citrulline. Once ingested, citrulline is sent to the kidneys, or is converted into nitric oxide precursor arginine, which will then be used to synthesize more nitric oxide, and therefore taking citrulline supplements can cause the same biological calamity that arginine or Viagra by stimulating the production of additional nitric oxide. Viagra. How hard is the evidence? Viagra is a drug used to induce erections in men having trouble getting hard. This makes for a fun and exciting conversation topic because erections lead to sex, and sex leads to orgasms. And who doesn't love a good orgasm? It's arguably the most pleasurable of all human experience, at least physically. Taking the drug Viagra is all fun and games, but is it worth losing your life over? Warning to men. Erection drugs just might kill you, is the title of an article by an American author and health journalist Michael Castleman, exposing the potential dangers of Viagra, as well as two other nitric oxide promoting erection drugs on the market, Cialis and Levitra. Castle writes, the Food and Drug Administration, the nation's drug safety watchdog, approved 3 main erection drugs as safe. But are they? Not quite. According to a recent study of erection medication, side effects during the decade from 1998, the year Viagra was approved, through 2007, Viagra has been implicated in at least 1,824 deaths, mostly from heart attacks. Cialis, approved in 2003, has been linked to 236 deaths, while Levitra, 2003, to 121. In addition, the 3 medications appear to have caused or significantly contributed to at least 2,500 non-fatal heart attacks and other potentially serious heart problems, and more than 25,000 other potentially serious side effects, among them mini strokes, vision loss, and hearing loss. Castleman goes on to expose what he calls a dirty little secret of safety studies presented to the FDA, which is that participant pools of the men numbered just a few thousand. If a drug kills, say, 1 person in 150,000, that side effect is likely to show up during pre-approval trials. The result is that when a drug like Viagra becomes a big seller and is issued to millions of men, many of them will drop dead from it. Soon after Viagra's release in 1998, bodies began dropping like flies. Many of the men who died were getting the double dose of nitric oxide by taking Viagra at the same time they were taking the nitrite medication nitroglycerin. We know that nitrates are converted into nitric oxide once inside the body, so the massive spike in funerals that resulted from the co-administration of these 2 drugs together is a testament to how physiologically devastating nitric oxide can be. However, what Castleman failed to mention in his article, and is probably not aware of, are the specific consequences of elevating nitric oxide inside the body. It is absolutely essential that Viagra be understood from the perspective of its role as a nitric oxide agonist, again, because it's the precise mechanism by which erection drugs are killing people. Viagra made nitric oxide famous as the erection chemical, but the list of side effects associated with it make the case for taking it soft. Short-term side effects include heart attacks and or strokes. Chronically elevated nitric oxide long-term causes cardiovascular disease, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's disease, and other types of neurodegenerative dementia. Furthermore, a recent study by scientists at the Harvard showed a dramatic increase in the risk of skin cancer following Viagra use. After following up with over 25,000 men, Viagra users were 84% more likely to develop melanoma, which is considered the most dangerous of skin cancers. There is one final and particularly abhorrent potential side effect of Viagra that I feel obligated to tell men about. In fact, I'd probably grab a ladder, then climb up onto my roof and yell this one if I thought it would make a difference. The permanent erection, gangrene, impotence, and amputation. It can begin after taking a single dose of Viagra, just 1 dose, and after your night of fun, your erection will go away, for hours or sometimes even days. Sounds like a dream come true, right? Wrong. In some cases, victims have suffered painful erections for several hours and needed hospital treatment. If erection lasts longer than 6 hours, it can restrict the blood supply to the intracavernosal smooth muscle in the penis, which facilitates the erection process, causing permanent damage. According to Dr. Kirby, a urologist at St. George Hospital, London, this condition of prolonged erection is called priapism, which is precipitated by a disturbed blood supply departing from the penis to the point where the tissue suffocates and gangrene of the penis ensues. Penile gangrene is a serious condition in which skin painfully swells and forms blisters that may rupture, even pus, and make an appearance during an episode of penile gangrene. An article in Independent recounts the ghastly experience of a Colombian man who took Viagra to try to impress his girlfriend. The 66-year-old Gentile Ramirez Polonio popped an erection drug before his big date, and after the party, his erection would not go away. In fact, it lasted several days. When Polonia finally went to the hospital complaining of pain, doctors found his penis to be inflamed, fractura, and showing signs of gangrene. In an effort to stop the gangrene from spreading to the rest of the man's bodies, doctors say they had no option but to remove the man's penis, the article reports. And there's a picture of a banana cut off. Ugh. Nitric oxide and vasodilation. One of the alleged benefits peddled by proponents of nitric oxide is the vasodilatory effects, meaning it relaxes the inner muscles of the blood vessels, increasing the circulation of blood to tissues of the body that need it. This is the main argument for the theory that nitric oxide supplements are beneficial for the body. However, there's an interesting paradox involved with the phenomenon. In small amounts, the vasodilatory effects of nitric oxide can indeed be beneficial, but what most proponents of nitric oxide supplementation don't realize is that in excess, it can be causative of a whole host of disorders and pathologies. If you think of the body mechanically like a car, which most scientists tend to do, anything that can increase blood vessel dilation will be seen as a good thing. Their thought process goes something like this. In cardiovascular disease, blood vessels are constricted, so blood vessels constriction bad. Nitric oxide causes blood vessels to dilate, so nitric oxide good. An honest misunderstanding of physiology? Mostly. In laboratory experiments, the belief in the dogma that nitric oxide is a miraculous anti-aging molecule is reinforced when scientists observe its immediate vascular dilatory effects. But, as previously mentioned, blood vessel dilation is not always a good thing. The idea that if you increase the diameter of a blood vessels by increasing your nitric oxide, you're going to reverse brain aging by getting more blood circulating. It does help the brain to function by circulating more blood through it, but the problem is nitric oxide, at the same time, is blocking the ability to use the oxygen, so it's imitating a shock state. In psychosis, for example, you get an exaggerated circulation of blood, which isn't being used because things like nitric oxide are inhibiting the oxidative enzymes. Dr. Raymond Peat. The paradox of nitric oxide as a vascular dilator is that it causes blood vessels to widen, increasing oxygen transport to areas that were previously hypoxic. It also simultaneously inhibits the capacity of those cells to utilize oxygen. In the exact same way as cyanide or carbon monoxide, nitric oxide switches off. In the exact same way as cyanide or carbon monoxide, nitric oxide switches off oxygen use by irreversibly binding directly to the critical respiratory enzyme found within the mitochondria of cells, called the cytochrome C oxidase, CCO. Cytochrome C oxidase is one of the most important metabolic enzymes in the electron transport chain because it catalyzes the final step in oxidative phosphorylation and interacts directly with oxygen. The result of the cytochrome C oxidase inhibition by nitric oxide is reduced energy production by cells. Constricted blood vessels can undoubtedly be found in people with high blood pressure, and high blood pressure is a precondition for complications like a heart attack or stroke. But when blood vessels are constricted, more nitric oxide isn't the answer. It turns out nitric oxide is the body's backup mechanism for dilating blood vessels during stress, and the body has its own much safer way to regulate this process. Carbon dioxide, the body's primary vasodilator. Over the oxygen supply of the body, carbon dioxide spreads its protective wings. Professor Jonas Meschire, 1885. Contrary to what nitric oxide enthusiasts believe, the body's primary blood vessel dilator and relaxing factor is not nitric oxide, but another molecule which does the job far more safely and effectively, carbon dioxide. To put it into context, nitric oxide can be thought of as a body's emergency substitute vascular dilator when carbon dioxide is not available. Students going into healthcare field are almost universally taught that carbon dioxide is a waste product of cellular metabolism. But far from the waste product, carbon dioxide is essential for health that scientist Kyle Mamanus calls the product of cellular metabolism. A high concentration of carbon dioxide in the body results in the maintenance of adequate blood vessel dilation and relaxation. The carbon dioxide is also directly responsible for shuttling oxygen into cells through a phenomenon called the Bohr effect. In one study, intentionally inhaled carbon dioxide was found to reverse pulmonary hypertension induced by oxygen deficiency, hypoxia. In other words, without adequate carbon dioxide, your body cannot use oxygen. Do people know that our health depends on the level of carbon dioxide in the body? Dr. Aline Vashiva and Dr. David Nias. One key to understanding carbon dioxide's soothing and calming effect physiologically is that following its production within the mitochondria of cells, it pulls calcium out of the cell and into the bloodstream along with it. This constant streaming of carbon dioxide and removal of calcium from within the cells helps balance blood pH and is essential for keeping the gears of your body metabolism oiled and effectively turning. Nitric oxide and carbon dioxide can both remove calcium from cells, but unlike carbon dioxide, nitric oxide can contribute directly to pathology through its toxicity and inhibitory effects on mitochondrial respiration. Nitric oxide hypothesis of aging. One of the most damning studies ever to combat the rolling tide of waves of misinformation regarding nitric oxide is called the nitric oxide hypothesis of aging. In the study, scientists from Louisiana State University suggest that nitric oxide is the primary driver of aging and causes damage to literally every organ in the body, particularly the brain and heart. At the Third International Symposium on Neurobiology and Neuroendocrinology of Aging, I presented evidence that suggests that excessive production of the free radical nitric oxide in the central nervous system and its related glands, such as the pineal and anterior pituitary, may be the most important factor in aging of these structures. Evidence for this hypothesis has been occurring rapidly. Disease and aging are characterized by the breakdown of efficient cellular energy metabolism inside cells of the body. Nitric oxide's powerful suppressive efforts on cellular metabolism explain why it's such a dominator. Nitric oxide's powerful suppressive effects on cellular metabolism explain why it's such a dominant promoter of tissue aging. Russian health researcher Georgy Dinkov describes a transition from health to disease and degeneration from the perspective of nitric oxide. Just like the stress hormones, in the short term, nitric oxide can be beneficial by preventing direct ischemia, or complete loss of oxygen. But when elevated levels of these things become chronic, a general adaptation syndrome begins, a term Hans Sela coined. Then the biomarker of stress, which is supposed to only be raised short term, becomes raised chronically. Then the body starts to adapt to it and basically is in a state of chronic hypoxia. The body says nitric oxide isn't enough. What else should I do to increase blood flow? Nitric oxide and lactate are the two most powerful stimulators of angiogenesis, the production of new blood cells, of the new blood vessels. When you need a wound heal, angiogenesis would be a good thing, but chronically, angiogenesis is one of the primary mechanisms behind the development and spread of cancer. If the nitric oxide hypothesis of aging is correct, reducing nitric oxide in the body is the most efficient target to halt aging and degeneration of tissues. Oh, and by the way, I thought now might be a good time to mention that caffeine contained in coffee I spoke about at the beginning of this chapter inhibits nitric oxide. Modern medicine goes astray when it seeks to elaborate nitric oxide levels until they contribute directly into the pathology. In fact, while the initial effects of nitric oxide may be vasodilation, nitric oxide in excess will quickly cause the opposition to occur, known as vascular constriction. The following is a perfect yet tragic example to illustrate this important point. Viagra clinical trial kills 11 babies. Experimenting with Viagra on pregnant women is one of the most shocking and dangerous medical fiascos I've encountered in all my research. Why the fuck would anyone want to give a pregnant woman the erection drug Viagra? It turns out the practice of giving pregnant women the nitric oxide prodrug Viagra is surprisingly common and approved in most countries for use in an attempt to improve uteroplacental blood flow, fetal growth, and meaningful infant outcomes. This is a classic example of scientists who have been taught to view nitric oxide as a vascular dilator, thinking more is better. But the tragic results of a 2018 Dutch clinical trial that administered Viagra to pregnant women in an attempt to improve the growth rate of their fetuses have proven otherwise, CNN reports. Half of the 183 mothers in the trial have been treated with sildenafil, while the other half were treated with a placebo. At the time they were treated, the mothers did not know which treatment they were receiving, which is standard in clinical trials. 93 women were treated with the drug, and 90 were treated with the placebo, or dummy pill. 19 babies born to the woman treated with the drug died, 11 of them due to the lung disorder. 6 babies were born with the lung disorder and survived. In comparison, 9 babies were born to the woman treated with the placebo died, but none of them had lung disorders. 3 babies with the lung disorders were born to women who were treated with the placebo, and they all survived. The hope was that the drug would open up some blood vessels in the placenta, according to Dr. Moen Pamy, and thereby help the growth of the fetus. But the Dutch researchers found instead that Viagra caused the babies to develop a blood vessel disease in the lungs and increase the risk of death after birth. The condition is essentially a type of high blood pressure in the lungs, wrote Deborah Goldschmidt and Michael Nettleman in the article from CNN. The emphasis I added to the previous quote marks the incredible irony about administering nitric oxide as a vascular dilator. Rather than dilating blood vessels, which would lower blood pressure, the initial burst of emergency vasodilation caused by the nitric acid was quickly replaced by the vasoconstriction and higher blood pressure, which ended up directly killing the babies. The Viagra used in the clinical trial was made by the pharmaceutical company Pfizer. Following the study, Pfizer spokeswoman Dorilla Kenya wrote in an email that the research was an investigator-initiated study, and Pfizer have no involvement in the trial. Kenya deflected all questions and responsibility to the scientists involved with the trial. Perhaps the most shocking and astounding thing about this story is that the use of Viagra on pregnant mothers continues to this day. You would think that the tragic loss of 11 babies would persuade scientists to halt the use of Viagra on expectant mothers, not to question their beliefs about the physiological role of nitric oxide in the body. But instead of admitting nitric oxide is probably not a miracle molecule they've been told, researchers instead blame the deaths on an incorrect dose and continue their experimentation on pregnant mothers to this day. When will we ever learn? Seriously. Ebola, bleeding eyes, and nitric oxide. In the 1995 blockbuster film Outbreak, a fictional town in California is quarantined when it becomes ground zero for an Ebola-like outbreak. The CDC and military medical researchers are tasked with containing and treating infected people who display all the classic symptoms of the Ebola virus, including bleeding from all orifices shortly before dropping dead. At the end stages of Ebola virus infection, small leaks in blood vessels cause blood to ooze from every hole in the victim's body, followed by a rapid drop in blood pressure that inevitably sends the patient into shock. Immunologist from the University of Texas, Thomas Gisbert, reports a surprising fact that not many people know. It's not the virus that kills the Ebola patient, but the cytokine storm, a signal that causes the immune system to launch an entire arsenal of weapons at once, released by the body's immune system to eliminate the infection that kills the patient. Can you guess the major factor released by the cytokine storm that induces leaky blood vessels and bleeding in Ebola victims? Studies show if Ebola patients are going to die, they are very high in nitric oxide, which is what is causing their blood vessels to leak, causing blood to leak out of all their orifices. During an outbreak of the Ebola virus in Uganda in 2000s, scientists obtained and analyzed blood samples from patients to examine gene expression, antigen levels, and nitric oxide levels. The study found that blood levels of nitric oxide were much higher in the fatal cases. If nitric oxide is responsible for the blood-gushing horrors seen in Ebola victims, do you still believe it's a health panacea? Conclusion. In stark contrast to the popular belief and medical dogma, nitric oxide is not the miracle molecule it is commonly believed to be. The many tragedies invoked by nitric oxide promoting drugs like Viagra demonstrate clearly that nitric oxide in excess is a destroyer of health and lives. The colossal and almost universal misunderstanding of nitric oxide in society began when pharmaceutical companies synthesized a drug that they believed would benefit men struggling to get erections. Industry-funded propaganda got the ball rolling on this line of thinking. Then the reductionist mindset of scientists, which see the body as a machine composed of parts rather than a dynamic living organism, capable of self-regulation, healing, and regeneration, bolstered its momentum to the point where we are at today. Society as a whole now endorses a lie as self-evident. In isolation, most scientists perceive the observation of blood vessel dilation to be of benefit. But when you zoom out and view the entire organism holistically, it becomes clear that the vascular dilator itself can have unfavorable, unintended, and even devastating consequences, such as in the case with free radical pollutant and nitric oxide. Nitric oxide plays a physiological role in both health and disease, but it is reserved for times of stress. During emergency situations with hypoxia, the body releases nitric oxide to widen blood vessels, because if it didn't, the cells would die. But any increase in nitric oxide comes at a price, and that price is a lower metabolic rate through its inhibition of enzymes involved in cellular metabolism. High levels of nitric oxide in the body are not a marker of health, but rather a marker of damaged, malfunctioning metabolism and aging. Elevating nitric oxide chronically through drugs or supplements can accelerate the formation of every known chronic degenerative disease. So next time you consider popping a Viagra pill, or attempted to purchase a nitric oxide prodrug or super beats loaded with nitric oxide precursor arginine to spice up your next workout, I hope you remember this chapter before making a decision. Like the big bold lettering on the front of a yellow paint road sign before a treacherous past a snowy, winding, mountainous road may suggest, proceed with caution. Key points to remember. In 1980s, drug company propaganda convinced the scientific world that nitric oxide was no longer a toxic pollutant, but rather a health-promoting substance to launch their new erection drug, Viagra. Nitric oxide is a free radical, which means it's highly reactive with other cellular structures, and it tends to increase the body with age. The bodybuilding world has been promoting nitric oxide supplements for decades. Unfortunately, and contrary to what is often claimed by supplement manufacturers, evidence suggests the overall effect of nitric oxide supplementation is reduced testosterone levels, muscle growth, and muscle performance as well as lower overall health. The dangers of elevated nitric oxide are illustrated by looking at the long list of potential side effects associated with nitric oxide promoting drugs like Viagra, including heart attack, stroke, cardiovascular disease, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's disease, dementia, cancer, and ironically, impotence and penile gangrene or amputation of the penis. The body's primary vasodilator is carbon dioxide, which is adequately present when cellular metabolism is properly functioning. When cellular metabolism isn't working properly, the tissues are deficient in oxygen, the body's backup vascular dilator nitric oxide is summoned to combat the hypoxia. In small amounts, nitric oxide increases blood flow and provides oxygen to parts of the body that need it. In large amounts, or chronically, nitric oxide has the opposite effect, blocking the body's ability to use oxygen and directly contributing to disease and aging. Stress, infection, radiation, and environmental chemicals are all powerful promoters of nitric oxide synthesis. Nitric oxide synthesis is part of the body's immune system, produced as a free radical defense mechanism to kill bacteria or other invading microorganisms. Nitric oxide induces damage by blocking the essential metabolic enzyme cytochrome C oxidase, which impairs cellular oxygen use. Scientists experimenting with Viagra on pregnant women killed 11 babies in 2018 from Pfizer. Despite this tragedy, similar experience continues to this day. The blood leakage from the eyes, ears, mouth, and other orifices of the body seen in Ebola patients is caused directly by nitric oxide. The nitric oxide hypothesis of aging suggests nitric oxide is a primary driver of aging and causes damage to literally every organ in the body, particularly the brain and the heart. If nitric oxide hypothesis of aging is correct, reducing nitric oxide in the body is the most efficient target to halt aging and degeneration of tissues. Menthol blue and caffeine are two potent nitric oxide inhibitors. Chapter 2. Gene Therapy Failure and the Future of Medicine. Without self-knowledge, without understanding the working and functions of his machine, man cannot be free, he cannot govern himself, and he will always remain a slave. G.I. Gurdjieff. G.I. Gurdjieff. Mainstream medicine focuses on treating and alleviating symptoms rather than the root cause of the disease behind its. Mainstream medicine focuses on treating and alleviating symptoms rather than the root cause of disease because it assumes the root cause of disease is something it's not. The modern medical establishment eagerly funds research aimed at finding genetic causation for diseases while snuffing out the research intended to reveal diseases' true metabolic origins. Genetic mutations don't cause disease. They are symptoms of mitochondrial dysfunction. Despite the mountain of evidence showing this, which I've documented in my book, Cancer, the Metabolic Disease Unraveled, the medical industry remains persistent and unwavering in its quest to find solutions for disease in all the wrong places. The delusion of gene therapy. The future vision of pharmaceutical industrialists is one which medical treatment is customized for each patient according to their individual genome. They call it precision medicine, or more commonly, gene therapy, a paradigm in which drug therapies tailored to the individual are used to fix broken genes. As exciting and promising as this concept may sound, freelance medical writers and editors of the journal Biotechnology Healthcare, Jack McCain, summed it up when he wrote, "In its current manifestation, gene therapy is an elegant concept crudely executed." Many people are under the impression that gene therapy's proof of concept was demonstrated in as early as 1990. Unfortunately, this was due to misinformation and irresponsible reporting by newspapers like the Los Angeles Times, claiming Dr. W. French Anderson, the father of gene therapy, cured a hereditary disease of immune system in a 4-year-old girl. That's not quite the way it happened, wrote McCain. It turns out the purpose of the study had nothing to do with the efficiency of the treatment at all. It was a study simply to test the safety of the treatment. Yes, the patient survived. But what the New York Times article failed to mention was that the patient was treated using conventional therapies before, during, and after gene therapy. To claim that gene therapy was the reason for the patient's survival is a gross misrepresentation of the truth. Leave it to popular media to twist the truth in the favor of big business that funds them. Another thing the article failed to mention was that up until the time of writing, 2 patients involved in gene therapy trials had died following the treatment, one from immune rejection, another from leukemia, in 1999 and 2003, respectively. The entire field of gene therapy, which some believe is the holy grail of medicine, stumbled into the existence with false and exaggerated claims. Theodore Friedman, MD, who had been deeply involved in the study of gene therapy for many decades, virtually its entire modern history, said that the purported success of the initial clinical trial in gene therapy is a perfect example of the confluence of exaggerated expectations and wishful thinking. Everybody wanted it to work. But he added, it was unfair to patients and the public that the heightened expectations generated by some of the scientists and their institutions, the media, and others served to raise false hope in many patients with many kinds of disease. Hope is necessary, but knowingly making an undeliverable promise and raising false hope is cruel, Friedman says. The delusion of a cure contributed to the crashing disappointment later. The father of gene therapy made the following prediction. Indeed, within 20 years, I expect gene therapy will be used regularly to eliminate or even cure many ailments. An exciting prospect indeed. However, he made that prediction in 1995, which means the 20-year window expired many years ago, and today, the routine use of gene therapy is non-existent, and nothing even remotely close to a cure has come from it. As of October 2020, there are 8 gene therapy products approved and in clinical use worldwide, including Gendicide in 2003 in China, Glyber in 2012 in Europe, Strimvilis in 2016 in Europe, Tisaglagagotala in 2017 in the United States, Axicabatagene in 2017 in the United States, Luxturana in 2017 in the United States, Zolgensma in 2019 in the United States, Zynteglo in 2019 in the United States. In stark contrast to Dr. Anderson's prediction about gene therapy, none of the existing approved gene therapies are used regularly, nor are any of them curing people. These therapies are not used regularly because the prices are astronomically high. For example, a single dose of Zolgensma will cost you $2,125,000, officially the most expensive drug of all time. It seems scientists would rather bite their toenails just so their full mouths would give them an excuse to not admit the truth. Damaged genes do not cause disease. Yet despite the monumental failure of gene therapy, the systematic grooming of gene therapy by the media, in bed with the pharmaceutical industry, and by government institutions funding research thus far have remained bulletproof. Biomedicine and gene therapies are booming, but we realize, as for other therapeutic approaches, that they suffer intrinsic constraints and limitations, and their most relevant therapeutic fields are complementary to those of traditional drugs. They are now viewed as potentially synergistic with these traditional drugs, rather than competitors, conceded French scientist Jean-Luc Gazi in 2019. Despite being proven a failure, publishing activity and hope of promises of gene therapy in some scientists Despite being proven a failure, publishing activity and hope of the promises of gene therapy in some scientists somehow remains higher than ever. Professor Espuza Belmont of the Stock Institute of the U.S. said of gene therapy, "It allows us for the first time to be able to dream of curing diseases that we could not before, which is exciting." Professor Belmont and scientists who share his excitement can continue dreaming all they want, but the prospect of curing diseases using gene therapy will never be anything other than a dream. It is time to leave the genetic-based medical treatment paradigm in the dust. Bioenergetics and the origin of the Frankenstein cells. Mitochondrial metabolism is now being seen as the basic problem in aging and severe degenerative diseases, Dr. Ray Peat. Anyone who has read my book, Red Light Therapy, Miracle Medicine, knows that the primary mechanism behind red light's remarkable healing potential is its restorative effects on cellular metabolism, specifically through the intensification of the metabolic enzyme cytochrome C oxidase. Once nitric oxide excesses are dealt with, efficient cellular energy regeneration resumes, and the body begins using that energy to heal. This mechanism of red light therapy explains the remarkable healing people are experiencing across the world. Modern scientific research has discovered that basically all known diseases are characterized by widespread dysfunction in metabolism. In other words, if the energy supply of your body is inadequate, your health will suffer. And a lack of health will be accompanied by symptoms which doctors use to diagnose any number of the 32,000 plus officially classified diseases. But regardless of what the symptoms are named, there is only one disease, and that route to recovery is focused on improving metabolic function within the cells. Vitamins and minerals in the diet provide the raw materials for the production of metabolic enzymes, which is why they're essential. These enzymes can be inhibited by exposure to environmental chemicals. Once nutrient deficiencies and chemical toxicities are addressed, a high metabolic rate can be restored. When it comes to health, energetics are everything. What causes genetic mutations? DNA strands break, genetic mutations, and damage have been demonstrated consistently and repeatedly to be triggered by conditions inside cells known as hypoxia, or insufficient oxygen. In other words, it's the breakdown of mitochondrial function within cells that triggers genetic mutations. The inhibition of oxygen used by nitric oxide can adequately explain all the horrors associated with the nitric excuse me. The inhibition of oxygen used by nitric oxide can adequately explain all the horrors associated with the nitric oxide prodrugs like Viagra that you read about in Chapter 1 of this book. Nitric oxide inhibits CCO, hypoxia, genetic mutations. The downstream consequences of nitric oxide anti-metabolic effects include genomic instabilities, genetic errors, double-strand DNA breaks, cell death, inflammation, and ultimately carcinogenesis. This explains why, after being granted a breakthrough therapy designation by the FDA in 2016 to accelerate the process of gene therapy involving the administration of genetically modified T cells, one study reported no improvement in outcome with gene therapy for heart failure. A shoe stuck in the gears of progress. Until people take responsibility for their thoughts and look at the research themselves, like you're doing by reading this book, our tax dollars will continually be funneled into research that will forever result in medicine that prolongs suffering and disease for as long as possible, in an effort to maximize the lifetime profit of each customer. If we want cures or even safe and effective medicines, we must be informed, honest, and bold enough to acknowledge that almost every medicine in the toolbox of a medical doctor will ultimately make our health worse. Likewise, scientists have struggled of their own that they must acknowledge and find ways to overcome. The gatekeepers of scientific research grants dole out funds for investigations aimed at uncovering genetic causations for diseases, while scorning scientists attempting to uncover metabolic origins of diseases. In a plea to fellow scientists and medical professionals, C.W. Stevens and E. Glastein from the Department of Radiation Oncology at the University of Pennsylvania wrote in a paper called Beware, the Medical Industrial Complex. We must not be seen as yet another special interest come to drink at the well of public spending, but as advocates for public good. If we fail to become important to those who control the medical spending, we will be unable to make any important long-term contributions to those who matter most, our patients. The Naked Mole Rat. I bet the last thing you expected to see in this chapter was a photo of Dr. Evil's cat. Well, not quite. While the skinny, hairless, buck-toothed features of a naked mole rat may bear a striking resemblance, its remarkable longevity and other features are unique to this fascinating creature. The naked mole rat lives its entire life underground in burrows with other rats, spending much of its time tunneling through soil to forage for roots. An article on endalldiseases.com titled Longevity Secrets of the Naked Mole Rat reveals many of the most health qualities of this fascinating creature. Naked mole rats can reproduce from puberty to the grave. They don't feel pain when being burnt with acid. They are immune to damage from chemical poisons. They are immune to cancer. They live up to 16 times longer than other rats of similar size, and their tissues literally do not age. For decades, scientists have been attempting to explain the extraordinary features of the naked mole rat, but have fallen short. Even in the most recent review, scientists admit they have no idea. The reason for their failure is, in precisely the same fashion that the genetic-based human research has failed to discover the underlying causes of diseases. The gatekeepers for scientific research grants only fund studies focusing on finding genetic explanations for these phenomena. If a scientist applies for a grant to discover which gene is causing the increased longevity in the rats, it'll probably be approved. But if the scientist wants to study naked mole rat metabolism, look out. Not only will the grant be rejected, but the threat of being flagged and prohibited from receiving funding for future research looms over the scientist's head. Friend and independent health researcher Georgi Dinkoff emailed one of the scientists working with naked mole rats asking them to study their metabolism, and he received the following response. No way in hell I'm going to check the metabolism. I got 3 grants from the National Institutes of Health decoding the naked mole rat's genome, so I have no time for this metabolic nonsense. Can you see a problem with this scientist's approach? Bravo if you said, yes, it's unscientific. The mission of a scientist is to cultivate a high level of critical thinking, coupled with a willingness to be wrong about their existing ideas or theories, recognizing that no science is ever entirely settled. Yet it's clear that this particular scientist's outright and emotionally charged refusal to question the existing paradigm suggests he's not only failing to embody what it means to be a scientist, but has become an impediment to progress and discovery. Thankfully, not all scientists are this way, and not all scientific research can be controlled. The truth is, genetics have literally nothing to do with the naked mole rat's phenomenal health attributes. Scientists' findings have revealed to us fascinating truth. Inside naked mole rat burrows, the composition of the air they breathe is in stark contrast with the atmospheric air of Earth. Air on Earth contains about 0.04% carbon dioxide and 20% oxygen, while air inside the mole rat burrow contains 6.1% carbon dioxide and 7.2% oxygen. By plugging the entrances to their burrow, naked mole rats modify the oxygen and carbon dioxide content of the air inside, making it ideal for the physiology. Naked mole rats reduce the oxygen concentration of their burrows to around 7% and increase the CO2 concentration to around 6%. The result? The increased CO2 acts as a potent antioxidant while maintaining exceptional blood vessel dilation and cellular oxygenation, resulting in a very high metabolic rate. A high metabolic rate can adequately explain all the outstanding physiological features of this charming and handsome subterranean creature. And if we can humble ourselves and admit that the rats are more intelligent than humans, we too can potentially share these same outstanding health features. 1. Disease. Mitochondrial dysfunction. If we learn to see the problem in terms of a general disorder of energy metabolism, we can begin to solve them. Dr. Raymond Peat. In the mitochondrial theory of aging, first proposed in 1972, Denham Harmon suggests that the rate of aging and onset of disease is determined by the rate of free radical leakage from the electron transport chain inside the mitochondrial cells. Free radicals leak when mitochondrial function fails, and they end up compromising the cell's performance, leading to the traits observed in aging. The paper Cellular Metabolism and Disease, What Do Metabolic Outliers Teach Us?, give us an inside look at the revolutionary shift in disease paradigm, currently underway from genetics to metabolism. An understanding of metabolic pathways based solely on biochemistry textbooks would underestimate the perverse role of metabolism in essentially every aspect of biology. It is evident from recent work that many human diseases involve abnormal metabolic states that perturb normal physiology and lead to severe tissue dysfunction. Understanding these metabolic outliners is now a crucial frontier in disease-oriented research. Remarkably, this information has been known for literally thousands of years, long before scientists even understood what cellular metabolism was, the scientists wrote. This insight predates the formal study of metabolism by many centuries. Almost 2,000 years ago, Celsius knew that rich foods and drink precipitated attacks of gout, and Indian physicians knew that urine of diabetic patients attracted ants, whereas normal urine did not. A greater appreciation for the relationship between precise metabolic activities and disease states blossomed during the Golden Age, but momentum in metabolic research gradually dissipated with the advent of newer areas of biological investigation in the latter half of the 20th century, and perhaps from the suspicion that most of what could be known about intermediary metabolism had already been discovered. The search for the genetic and molecular basis of cancer, diabetes, obesity, and neurodegeneration displaced focus from understanding the altered metabolic states in these diseases. Many common diseases are now understood in terms of inherited or somatic mutations that impact gene expression, signal transduction, cellular differentiation, or other processes not traditionally viewed in bioenergetic or metabolic terms. Here we are in the 21st century, and progress from modern science has actually brought us back to the time and truth that was once known, yet forgotten. Powerful economic forces grip tightly onto the highly profitable, yet utterly failed paradigm of genetic causation of disease. But the truth has torn through the fabric of the paradigm, and there is no needle and thread in existence that can repair it. Pandora's box has been opened, and never again can it be sealed. The rise of metabolic therapies. Therapies that target cellular metabolism for repair are the final frontier in their medicine. Nutrients, therapies, and drugs that effectively enhance the body's metabolic rate already exist on the market today. Miraculously, some of the finest medicines are also the least expensive, most easily obtainable, and come with virtually no side effects. If we consciously seek out and utilize only remedies that target metabolic deficiencies while avoiding toxic drugs that target symptoms, we can thrive, not just survive, in the great transition from genetic to metabolic medicine. Key points to remember. Genetic mutations don't cause disease. They are a symptom of mitochondrial dysfunction. Propaganda has convinced many scientists that gene therapy is the holy grail of medicine. Gene therapy has been a complete and utter failure. It has provided no meaningful treatments, let alone cures. Naked mole rats are immune to cancer, and their tissues literally do not age to their extraordinarily high metabolic rates. The metabolic origins of disease have been known for almost 2,000 years, long before metabolism was studied scientifically. Modern scientific breakthroughs have brought us back in time to the truth that we once known, yet forgotten. Only one disease exists: metabolic dysfunction. Therapies that target the metabolism for repair are the final frontier in medicine. Some of the first metabolic medicines are also the safest and least expensive. Methylene Blue might be the most potent metabolic therapy ever discovered. Part 2. Methylene Blue, the great nitric oxide inhibitor. Meet Methylene Blue. Methylene Blue, methylonium chloride, is one of the oldest organic dyes ever produced. In 1876, German chemist Heinrich Caro. Meet Methylene Blue. Meet Methylene Blue. Methylene Blue is one of the oldest organic dyes ever produced. In 1876, German chemist Heinrich Caro, head of research of the world's largest chemical producing company, BASF, first synthesized this pure blue dye to stain wool for a textile industry. But it wasn't long before medical researchers discovered uses for methylene blue far beyond fabric clothing. The vast and expansive utility of methylene blue suddenly bled from the fabric industries into medicine. In 1880, microbiologist Robert Koch pioneered the use of methylene blue for staining cells and microbes for easier visualization under a microscope. As a stain in microscopy, methylene blue can help scientists distinguish dead cells from living cells. It can also help them study the internal components of cells by highlighting their anatomical structures. Koch began using methylene blue to stain tuberculosis-causing bacteria to better understand tuberculosis. And Polish pathologist Segla Shalinsky used it to stain malaria-causing parasites to better understand malaria. Not only is methylene blue capable of staining the malaria-causing parasites, but it was found also to be capable of killing it, noted German physician and Nobel Prize laureate Paul Ehrlich. In 1891, Ehrlich published a case study on 2 malaria patients who were allegedly cured using methylene blue. It is used for the treatment of malaria, awarded methylene blue the honor of being the first pharmaceutical drug in history. During the Second World War, methylene blue was given to soldiers as an anti-malaria drug. Their blue-colored urine was found useful for doctors as means to know whether or not they were adhering to their methylene blue drug treatment regimens. Complaints from World War II soldiers and patients about methylene blue coloring the urine blue soon stimulated a transition to other drugs to treat malaria. However, modern research has revived interest in using methylene blue as an anti-malarial and is considered one of the most, if not the most, effective drug for the disease to this day. Methylene blue in the brain. While studying methylene blue in his lab, Ehrlich observed that it would quickly concentrate in the brain once injected into animals. This gives the drug enormous potential for conditions involving the brain, which we will explore in greater detail in the upcoming chapters. Methylene blue was one of the first drugs used to treat patients with psychosis at the end of the 19th century. It was studied for bipolar disorder in the 1980s. Since then, it has been under investigation for its potential use in dementia and other neurodegenerative-related disorders. Methylene blue targets diseased tissues. Methylene blue's uncanny ability to selectively target diseased tissues in the body was another observation made by Ehrlich. Although healthy tissues could benefit from the methylene blue, the cells with the greatest dysfunction metabolically received aid first. Inspired by his research into the methylene blue, Ehrlich coined the term magic bullet, which is still used today. Methylene blue redox test for milk. In the 1940s and 50s, the methylene blue redox test was used to determine the freshness of milk by indirectly revealing how much oxygen is inside the milk. Add a couple drops of methylene blue to a glass of milk, and the methylene blue will slowly discolorize in proportion to the amount of oxygen in it. The less oxygen, the closer to spoiled, the more quickly the blue color will disappear. Although, in a sense, milk never really spoils, it ferments into other delicious and nourishing products like yogurt and cheese. People buying milk generally want it fresh and unfermented. So in this context, it is considered spoiled when oxygen is used up. The living cells within are then forced to begin producing energy fermentivity without oxygen, as opposed to oxidativity with oxygen. The methylene blue reduction test is as accurate a measure of keeping the quality of milk as any method yet available. It will divide milk into 3 or 4 classes with reasonable accuracy, as will any of a number of tests for milk quality. It is inexpensive and nearly foolproof as any method for this purpose available to dietary bacteriologist. Thornton, 1930. Methylene blue redox skin test. Similar to the milk test, if you put a drop of methylene blue on your skin, the quicker it disappears, the more starved for oxygen, hypoxic, the local tissue is. Since methylene blue substitutes for oxygen, the more hypoxic the skin tissue, the quicker it gets used. According to independent health researcher Georgi Dinkvot, if the methylene blue drop on your skin completely disappears in less than 6 hours, it indicates local hypoxia. How methylene blue works. The trillions of cells which your body is comprised are the foundations of life itself. It's the mitochondria within your cells that produces this biological energy in the form of a molecule called ATP, the energy currency of the body. Any increase in ATP production will be beneficial, particularly to individuals who are sick. Research into therapeutic values of methylene blue dates back to the 1800s, but only within the past couple of decades have scientists decoded exactly how methylene blue provides its benefits to the brain and body, spanning all the way down to the molecular level in the mitochondria. Methylene blue works by directly increasing mitochondrial respiration through its interactions with the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain is a series of 4 protein complexes that sit inside the mitochondrial membrane and are responsible for producing ATP, a process called oxidative phosphorylation. The remarkable therapeutic effects of methylene blue are predicted by its ability to act as an alternative electron carrier when any of the mitochondrial complexes 1 through 4 are dysfunctional. The primary ways that methylene blue benefit the body is its role as a nitric oxide inhibitor and an estrogen antagonist. By reducing nitric oxide and estrogen, thyroid function is increased, and the body benefits from increased metabolic rate and overall energy production. Below is a list of the ways methylene blue improves metabolism. 3 ways methylene blue inhibits nitric oxide. Inhibits nitric oxide synthesis, dissociates nitric oxide from cytochrome C oxidase enzyme, scavenges existing nitric oxide. Methylene blue effects on metabolism: increases oxygen consumption and ATP production, increases glucose consumption, increases the NAD/NADH ratio, decreases lactic acid production, is a potent antioxidant, acts similarly to vitamin E, inhibits monoamino oxidase, acts as an alternative electron carrier in the mitochondrial electron transport chain. Methylene blue effects on hormones: inhibits prolactin, inhibits estrogen, increases thyroid hormone and lowers TSH, increases testosterone. Modern interest in methylene blue skyrocketing. In recent years, research into the use of methylene blue has skyrocketed. Never in history has there been more interest in scientific papers published involving methylene blue. As the research train rolls on, scientists discover more and more uses for methylene blue that can benefit many disease pathologies safely and effectively. The world is catching on to the fact that all diseases are metabolic in nature, and that methylene blue selectively targets cells and tissues that have dysfunctional metabolism. It's only a matter of time before methylene blue is recognized as one of the most potent medicines ever discovered. Top 10 benefits of methylene blue. Now that you've been acquainted with methylene blue, it's time to discover some of the remarkable things methylene blue can do for your health by diving straight into the scientific and clinical research. This information is probably why you purchased this book in the first place, so I'm glad you've made it this far. Here's my official list of the top 10 benefits of methylene blue. An antidote for chemical poisoning or overdose, the greatest anti-malaria drug ever discovered, methylene blue, the virus warrior, forget dementia, MB for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, cognitive enhancement, a brain-boosting powerhouse, depression no more, a hope for autism, the great pain reliever, a healthier heart, and methylene blue versus cancer. Number 1. An antidote for chemical poisoning and overdose. If you thought methylene blue was some obscure and opulent medicinal chemical that's not well known or is not yet widespread use in this world, think again. Methylene blue is always present as a main antidote required in emergency and critical care units, wrote a group of scientists in a scientific review article published in 2018. In fact, methylene blue is so essential and routinely used in hospital emergency rooms that scientists from the United States, Japan, Greece, Italy, and Canada have stressed the importance of stockpiling it. Situations in which methylene blue is routinely used in hospital emergency rooms include circulatory shock, neuroprotection, anaphylaxis, and overdoses and the chemical poisonings. Around 1930, Matilda Moldenhauer Brooks, PhD, suggested using methylene blue as an antidote for cyanide and carbon monoxide poisoning, which stemmed from a number of studies she conducted on animals. Since then, cyanide victims in critical care units worldwide have been treated successfully using methylene blue. But methylene blue works as an antidote for far more than just cyanide and carbon monoxide poisoning. It's important to understand that chemical poisoning induced situations on the body called methylmaloneuria, which is the one and only condition methylene blue has been FDA approved to treat. Once you understand this condition and how methylene blue can remedy it, you'll comprehend its value as an antidote for virtually all chemical poisonings and why hospital emergency rooms commonly use it for this application. Methemoglobinemia is a blood disorder that occurs when hemoglobin contained inside the red blood cells becomes oxidized and loses its capacity to transport oxygen. The oxidized form of hemoglobin is called methemoglobin, hence the name methemoglobinemia. The presence of high levels of methemoglobin in the blood leads to tissue hypoxia. Without oxygen, nitric oxide, and a cascade of stress hormones and pro-inflammatory signals are all increased, and the body's energy supply is essentially switched off. Symptoms of methemoglobia. Common symptoms of methemoglobinemia include blue fingertips, shortness of breath, confusion, seizures, coma, and metabolic atosis. Chocolate brown colored blood is another one of the definitive characteristics of methemoglobinemia. Causes of methemoglobinemia is cyanide, carbon monoxide, sodium nitrate, acetophenamine, formaldehyde, pharmaceutical drugs, party drugs, poppers, lidocaine, benzocaine, and other anesthetics, heavy metals like aluminum, copper, or cadmium, fluoride, chlorine dioxide-based household cleaning products, chemicals found in drugstores, shampoos, deodorants, and soaps, and COVID-19 can also induce methemoglobinemia. Menthol blue treatment for methemoglobinemia. When emergency room patients with methemoglobinemia are treated using methylene blue, it acts as a potent antidote by converting methemoglobin back into hemoglobin, restoring its oxygen carry capacity. Then oxygen can be transported throughout the body to the cells and tissues where it's needed. Once oxygen is restored, all the symptoms experienced by the patient are resolved. Most medical personnel administering methylene blue for chemical poisonings or overdoses are not aware that methylene blue's value as an antidote extends far beyond its capacity to convert oxidized hemoglobin back to its regular form. In a 2018 study examining the use of methylene blue for cyanide poisoning, scientists wrote, its protective effects appear to be related to the unique properties of this redox dye, which, depending on the dose, could directly oppose some of the consequences of the metabolic depression produced by cyanide at the cellular level. In other words, methylene blue correlated the defective cellular metabolism caused by the poison. Number 2, the greatest anti-malaria drug ever discovered. Even at the loo, we pee navy blue, observed soldiers given methylene blue during World War II. Even at the loo, we pee navy blue, observed soldiers given methylene blue during World War II. Allied forces in the South Pacific widely used methylene blue to prevent and treat malaria infections during the Second World War. Despite it keeping them healthy and being well tolerated, most soldiers didn't like it because it caused blue-colored urine. Prior to methylene blue, the classic treatment for malaria was a compound called quinine, which is an alkaloid contained within the bark of Sinchocono tree native to South America. The bark of the Sinoco tree was first employed to treat malaria in Europe during the 15th century. Interestingly, the carbonated beverage known as tonic water contains quinine, which some people drink to ease leg cramps. If you can handle the bittersweet tang of tonic water between the quinine, glucose, and carbon dioxide contained within it, you've got yourself a refreshing and medical beverage. Following the discovery and synthesis of methylene blue, suddenly malaria medicine could be produced on a large scale in a laboratory without needing to be laboriously isolated from a plant bark only available in South America. This represented a quantum leap in malaria treatment and medicine. But since methylene blue stains the mouth and tends to color the urine bluish-green, scientists began altering the molecule structure of methylene blue, attempting to remove the tint while maintaining its medicinal qualities. The work of chemists like Wilhelm Röhl of Bayer, a student of Ehrlich, eventually gave rise to a drug, quinacerin, for malaria. Then in 1934, quinacerin was modified by Hans Angersager, which resulted in the synthesis of chloroquine, used as a standard treatment for malaria to this day. You may have heard doctors talk about the use of hydroxychloroquine as an effective antidote to the 2020 viral pandemic, COVID-19. It turns out that hydroxychloroquine is derived from methylene blue. Methylene blue and its preventative compound, which reveals methylene blue's potential for treating COVID and other viruses, a subject we'll soon explore. One of the challenges with malaria treatment is that malaria parasites, such as Plasmodium falciparum, shows increased resistance to the common anti-malarial drugs. This has promoted scientists like Professor Olaf Müller of Heidelberg University to revisit the methylene blue as an anti-malarial. Cellular culture experiments show that methylene blue has remarkable anti-malarial potency at very low doses. Perhaps most importantly, experiments show that resistance to methylene blue is also very low. The new generation of methylene blue research as an anti-malarial agent has proven that no drug even comes close to the potency or effectiveness of methylene blue against malaria. Dr. Ehrlich reported in 1891 to have completely cured 2 malaria patients using methylene blue. Similarly, scientists from Radboud University Medical Center in the Netherlands reported in 2018 to have also completely cured malaria patients using methylene blue in just 48 hours. This was an unprecedented rate, far quicker than any known drug or remedy. Additionally, patients no longer transmitted the parasite when they were bitten by a mosquito following treatment. Methylene blue is very promising because it can prevent the spread of malaria with such a short time following treatment. There are also indications that methylene blue also works well in species that are resistant to certain medicines. Tinu Buzema, study coordinator. It appears that all the advancements in new generations of anti-malarial drugs since methylene blue were not advancements at all, and methylene blue is still the victor. On World Malaria Day in 2018, German researchers published a meta-analysis on the use of methylene blue for malaria and concluded it is highly effective against malaria-causing parasite in all endemic areas. Methylene blue, the virus warrior. The life cycle of parasites, bacteria, fungi, and viruses are all in jeopardy when in the presence of methylene blue. And when used in combination with light therapy, methylene blue exerts even greater antimicrobial And when used in combination with light therapy, methylene blue exerts even greater antimicrobial effects against bacteria, like E. coli and others, including drug-resistant strains against fungi like Candida, and also against many common viruses, including Zika, West Nile, Ebola, hepatitis, and HIV. If a fart can go through your underwear, a virus can go through your mask. My 5-year-old nephew. After the COVID-19 pandemic was declared in spring of 2020, my nephew's words brought my family and me some much-needed laughter. Regardless of your take on the use of masks, forced isolation, or your government's response to COVID-19 pandemic, one thing we can all agree on is that it would be nice to have a way to effectively prevent and eliminate viruses, so we never have to ride the turbulent wake of pandemic again. Methylene blue terminates COVID, HIV, Ebola, Zika, and other viruses. The value of methylene blue as an antiviral, which has a rich history in the scientific literature, and has proven itself valuable against many of the viruses considered to be serious threats to humanity. Methylene blue might be the greatest antiviral that will ever be, not only for the virus responsible for COVID-19, but also for many other popular and allegedly dangerous viruses. What's more, when you combine light therapy with methylene blue, these two powerful mitochondrial therapies synthesize together and result in a significantly enhanced antiviral activity. Here are some examples of antiviral activity methylene blue has shown alone and in combination with light therapy. When used with light therapy, the treatment is called photodynamic therapy, which you'll soon learn more about for various diseases. Methylene blue inactivates Zika virus and Cinnabar virus. Methylene blue plus light inactivates West Nile virus. Methylene blue plus light reduces Ebola virus. Methylene blue plus light reduces Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome virus infectivity. Methylene blue plus light reduces HIV-1 to non-detectable levels. Methylene blue plus light reduces biovine diarrhea virus to non-detectable levels. Methylene blue plus light reduces pseudorabies virus to non-detectable levels. Methylene blue plus light reduces hepatitis A virus. Methylene blue plus light reduces porcelain parvovirus. Methylene blue plus light inactivates Androvirus 71. Methylene blue plus light inactivates Flavarius virus. Methylene blue plus light inactivates the herpes virus. Methylene blue plus light inactivates dengue virus. Methylene blue for COVID-19. The virus responsible for COVID-19 pandemic, SARS-CoV-2, has affected our lives profoundly and in some ways permanently. Did you ever think you'd be living in a world where people were afraid to shake hands, hug, or even be near someone? Almost immediately following the declaration of the COVID-19 pandemic by the World Health Organization in March 2020, behind the scenes, scientists from across the world got to work searching for ways to inhibit the replication and spread of the virus. Chinese scientists were the first among to investigate methylene blue's effects on COVID-19. In March 2020, they published a study reporting methylene blue can effectively eliminate SARS-CoV-2 in vitro within 2 minutes. 2 minutes? Why didn't the public hear about this? It took quite a long time before the scientists in other countries followed up on these findings. In October 2020, French researchers duplicated the study in their lab and came to the same conclusion. In very low doses, methylene blue possessed powerful antiviral activity against SARS-CoV-2. Their study concluded, "We propose that methylene blue is a promising drug for the treatment of COVID-19. Doctors claims methylene blue derivative cures COVID-19. You may have seen the viral, no pun intended, video of Nigerian doctor Stella Emanuel claiming she used hydroxychloroquine to cure hundreds of COVID patients, which was quickly censored and pulled from social media websites. Why did they pull it? It turns out this effective drug against COVID is actually derived from methylene blue. In other words, methylene blue is a parent compound of the hydroxychloroquine that to this day is used for the primary treatment for malaria and found to be effective and some say curative against COVID-19. Can methylene blue block COVID transmission? Cancer patients have a higher than normal risk of viral infections due to the compromised immune system and overall poor health status. When scientists administered methylene blue to 2,500 cancer patients, none of them ended up developing COVID-19. Coincidence? Or is methylene blue the first-class preventative? How COVID manifests in the body. It's important to understand how COVID-19 affects the body. The way it manifests is something you are now familiar with if you've read the preceding chapter in this book. A study from January 2021 showed that COVID is simply another case of widespread mitochondrial dysfunction. Its pathology is exactly the same as virtually all other diseases, including diabetes, cancer, heart disease, obesity, Alzheimer's, etc. We demonstrate mitochondrial dysfunction, metabolic alterations with an increase in glucose. From patients with COVID-19, this data suggests that patients with COVID-19 have a compromised mitochondrial function and an energy deficit that is compensated by a metabolic switch to glycolysis. The metabolic manipulations by SARS-CoV-2 triggers an enhanced inflammatory response that contributes to the severity of the symptoms in COVID-19, wrote scientists from King's College Hospital in London, UK, the University of Alabama at Birmingham. What that means is COVID inhibits cellular metabolism, and methylene blue works by powerfully restoring metabolic functions to cells. Scientists testing nitric oxide to treat COVID-19. I want to address the recent flood of research reporting that nitric oxide can inhibit the replication of COVID-19, which is another fantastic example of mass ignorance within the scientific community. Yes, choking off the energy supply of an infective cell in a petri dish by poisoning it with free radical like nitric oxide will inhibit its ability to create the proteins necessary for viral replication. But due to the reductionist mindset and lack of understanding of how the body actually works, these scientists fail to recognize the overwhelmingly negative consequences of introducing a dose of toxic free radicals into a living organism. As we've explored thoroughly in previous chapters, nitric oxide forcefully damages cellular mitochondrial function and metabolic activity within all cells of the body. Likewise, one of the primary reasons methylene blue is so effective against viruses is that it reduces nitric oxide levels, which upregulates energy availability, enhancing the body's innate immune defenses, helping it abolish the virus all on its own. In 2021 review of methylene blue for COVID-19 reports, the only drug known to inhibit the excessive production of reactive species and cytokines is methylene blue, a low-cost dye with antiseptic properties used effectively to treat malaria, urinary tract infections, septic shock, and methemoglobinemia. Forget dementia, methylene blue versus Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. The CDC, Mayo Clinic, and other pop culture health pundits admit they have no idea what causes Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. For around 50 years, they have focused funding on genetic research, believing that genetic defects cause Alzheimer's. But the genetic theory has never been proven. As a result of their commitment to genetic causation, they ignore the trial of evidence leading to the true cause of dementia. Let's dust off that trail now and shine a spotlight on the evidence. A groundbreaking study from 2017 reports that as the brain ages, mitochondrial metabolism decreases, and that this phenomenon is possibly the main culprit behind many neurological diseases, including Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. If your brain has sufficient energy, it will function effectively. From memory retrieval, speed, concentration, and focus. As the metabolic rate of the brain declines with age, so does your ability to think, remember, and speak clearly. In recent years, the role of nitric oxide in the formation and progression of dementia-related disorders like Alzheimer's disease has come to light. For example, nitric oxide has been found to accumulate around the plaques inside the brain of Alzheimer's patients, and it's also been hypothesized that nitric oxide could be responsible for the brain cell death found in Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. All these suggest that using nitric oxide inhibitor, such as Methylene Blue, could be a remarkably effective tool for dealing with dementia. One fascinating and useful attribute of Methylene Blue for treating brain disorders is that once inside the body, it tends to accumulate in the brain right where it is needed. This makes it potential as a therapy of particular interest for dementia and all kinds of brain-related disorders. The acetylcholine myth. If current medical drugs prescribed for Alzheimer's patients worked, then the disease would no longer exist. But the disease does exist, and its prevalence is higher than ever before in history, and is expected to increase going forward. I've included this section on the role of acetylcholine on Alzheimer's and brain aging to clear up some misconceptions and explain why medical doctors have neither the tools nor the knowledge to help someone with this condition. Dr. Ray Peat explains, the current popular medical approach to treating Alzheimer's disease is to try and increase the level of acetylcholine by blocking the enzymes that break it down. And they've demonstrated that it doesn't work, and so they need a new fundamental theory. But their theory is so mistaken, it's hard for them to get off onto a new line of drug treatment. Acetylcholine is essential and part of our conscious regulation in all kinds of biological processes, but it activates the enzyme that produces nitric oxide, and nitric oxide blocks energy production. And so, the process of exotoxicity that made monosodium glutamate notorious became a little too much of it activates the production of a little too much of acetylcholine, which makes too much nitric oxide. Nitric oxide poisons the ability to oxidize glucose in the carbon dioxide, increases lactic acid, and the cell has less energy and is more excited by the acetylcholine. So basically it becomes susceptible to dying in proportion to the overstimulation of acetylcholine. Dr. Ray Peat. Once again, the reality turns out to be exactly the opposite of what the for-profit mainstream medical industry claims. Acetylcholine accumulates as both brain and body age, so taking drugs to increase acetylcholine even more, which medical doctors will prescribe, can only make the situation worse. The rational approach to treating Alzheimer's disease is to decrease the production and action of acetylcholine in the brain. Listed below is some of the existing scientific evidence in support of the idea that too much acetylcholine can have negative effects on the health of the brain and body. During slow-wave sleep, low acetylcholine levels in the hippocampus are essential for long-term storage of declarative memories to occur. Studies have shown that increasing acetylcholine during slow-wave sleep completely blocked slow-wave sleep-related consolidation of declarative memories for word pairs in human subjects. Drugs that block acetylcholine production by blocking nicotinic acetylcholine receptors have antidepressant-like effects in animal studies. People with hives tend to have higher acetylcholine in their skin, which causes excess histamine to be produced and reduces sweating. Drugs that block acetylcholine are being investigated for preventing hives outbreaks. How to reduce acetylcholine. There are two approaches to lowering acetylcholine. First, inhibit acetylcholine production by blocking acetylcholine receptors. Second, increase chlorinesterases, an enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. How to reduce acetylcholine production. Methylene Blue reduces acetylcholine production by blocking acetylcholine receptors. How to increase acetylcholine breakdown. A rich environment increases the enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine, said Dr. Pete, which includes having lots of fun, reading interesting things, and talking to interesting people. Can methylene blue cure dementia? In 2019, scientists gave Alzheimer's patients 8 milligrams to 16 milligrams of methylene blue daily while monitoring their brain function. They witnessed a methylene blue treatment stopped Alzheimer's disease dead in its tracks. Treatment with 8 to 16 milligrams daily reduced cognitive decline by more than 85%. That is preventative medical profession's way of saying that methylene blue effectively stopped Alzheimer's in its tracks, or at least its cognitive symptoms, which is what this disease is all about. It is a type of dementia, after all. People, just as importantly, have found that the drugs currently approved for managing symptoms of Alzheimer's interfere with the therapeutic benefits of methylene blue when administered together with it. Georgi Dinkoff. When a therapy stops cognitive decline by 85% over 65 weeks, as it did in the study, at what point do we say it cured the patient? If your answer is 100%, then perhaps methylene blue is about as close to the cure as it gets. Treatment dose for dementia. For those interested in using methylene blue for Alzheimer's, an important finding from the study was that a dose of 200 milligrams of methylene blue had no greater benefit than a much smaller dose of 8 milligrams. The study concluded that methylene blue is expected to be therapeutic in doses up to 16 milligrams, and patients would see no additional benefit from taking higher doses. Treatment benefit is predicted as maximal at 16 milligrams a day as monotherapy, scientists reported. Methylene blue and the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. Scientists studying the brains of Alzheimer's patients notice a few things that are common or universal amongst patients, which they refer to as hallmarks of the disease. One hallmark of neurodegeneration is abnormally shaped tau proteins, or neurofibrillary tangles, within brain cells called neurons. Hallmark number 1, neurofibrillary tangles. When mice are genetically engineered to lack tau protein, their brain cells do not function properly, leading researchers to believe that the misshapen tau proteins found in brain cells of Alzheimer's patients plays a role in the disease. Saitoda, Mieda, Nakamura, Komoji, and Takashima, a team of scientists from Gakushūin University and Keio University School of Medicine in Japan, published a study in 2019 that reports methylene blue can fix this issue by inhibiting the formation of tau neurofibrillary tangles in the brain. Hallmark number 2, beta amyloid plaques. Another classic hallmark of Alzheimer's brain is the presence of beta amyloid plaques surrounding the brain cells. Remarkably, methylene blue has been shown scientifically to prevent beta amyloid plaques from forming on the outside of the neurons. As you've seen in this section, evidence suggests the resolution of both of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease using methylene blue is not a bad for a fabric dye. As you've seen in this section, evidence suggests the resolution of both of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease using methylene blue. Not bad for a fabric dye. Lies and manipulation by Big Pharma. In July 2016, mainstream media outlets reported that a patented form of methylene blue called LMTX, developed by Tau Rx Pharmaceuticals, failed to improve cognitive and functional skills in patients with mild to moderate Alzheimer's disease. But wait, a closer look at the clinical trial reveals methylene blue only failed when combined with highly exotoxic drugs currently used for treatment of Alzheimer's disease. In patients that took methylene blue on its own, the therapy worked. But in a perplexing twist, the drug did show significant benefit in about 15% of patients in the trial who were not taking other standard Alzheimer's drugs, according to the findings released on Wednesday at the Alzheimer's Association International Conference in Toronto. In a classic manipulative strategy by pharmaceutical companies, a dose of poison was given to patients along with methylene blue to make it appear ineffective, thus killing the incentive for further research. In November 2017, results from a second phase 3 study were published, showing once again benefits of methylene blue as a monotherapy. Attempts to thwart research in methylene blue appear to have been averted by scientists who concluded, in order to get a clearer idea of the effects of LMTX, we now need to see carefully planned studies that focus on LMTX alone and don't involve people who are taking other Alzheimer's medications. The research continues. The metabolic hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. As you've deduced from reading this chapter, the details of dementia can be infinitely complex. Still, the truth can also be made simple by realizing that the decline in mitochondrial metabolism is what neurological diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's are all about. We've gone over some of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease purported by mainstream sources, but it's evident that the aggregation of beta amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles are likely effects rather than causes. The plaques and tangles are downstream epinephrine occurring after the breakdown in efficient cellular metabolism. I've taken the liberty to create a description of the two metabolic hallmarks of dementia below, which appear to be far more accurately represented of physiological conditions causative of dementia and other forms of neurodegeneration. Hallmark number 1, decreased mitochondria complex 4 function. In Alzheimer's, one of the specific metabolic hallmarks is a decline in the complex 4 function within the mitochondria of cells. Complex 4 of the electron transport chain involves the enzyme cytochrome C oxidase, which interacts directly with oxygen and catalyzes the final step in cellular respiration. It turns out methylene blue has a restorative effects on complex 4. In 2007, animal experiment administered methylene blue, 1 milligram per kilogram, to rats once a day for 3 days and found that brain cytochrome C oxidase activity was 70% higher than in the placebo-treated group. The improved memory consolidation that resulted from the methylene blue treatment was attributed to the increase in metabolic activity of the brain. In 2008, researchers from Nutrition and Metabolism Center at Children's Hospital Oakland Research Institute in California reported that methylene blue extended the lifespan of human cells by enhancing mitochondrial function, specifically complex 4 activity. Methylene blue increases mitochondrial complex 4 by 30%, enhances cellular oxygen consumption by 37 to 70%, increases heme synthesis, and reverses premature aging. The results were very encouraging, said Dr. Adama, the study lead author. We'd eventually like to try to prevent the physical and cognitive decline associated with aging, with a focus on people with Alzheimer's disease. One of the key aspects of Alzheimer's disease is mitochondrial dysfunction, specifically complex 4 dysfunction, which methylene blue improves. Our findings indicate that methylene blue, by enhancing mitochondrial function, expands the mitochondrial reserve of the brain. Adequate mitochondrial reserve is essential for preventing age-related disorders, such as Alzheimer's disease. What we potentially have is a wonder drug, said Dr. Ames. To find that such a common and inexpensive drug could be used to increase and prolong the quality of life by treating such serious diseases is truly exciting. Hallmark number 2, decreased glucose levels in the brain. Looking deeper into the dysfunctional metabolism seen in dementia, a study at the Lewis Katz School of Medicine at Temple University in Philadelphia reports that one of the earliest signs of Alzheimer's disease is a decline in glucose levels in the brain. In recent years, advances in imaging techniques, especially positron emission topography, a PET scan, have allowed researchers to look for subtle changes of the brain in the brains of patients with different degrees of cognitive impairment, explained Domenico Patrico, MD, Professor, Center for Translational Medicine at the Lewis Katz School of Medicine at Temple University. One of the changes that has been consistently reported is the decrease in glucose availability in the hippocampus. Based on these findings, all forms of dementia and neurodegeneration could accurately be called diabetes of the brain, a situation in which brain cells cannot use glucose. So what role, if any, can methylene blue play in restoring glucose by the cells? A 2015 study reports that treating astrocytes, a star-shaped glial cells in the brain and spinal cord that are essential for brain function, with methylene blue, significantly increased cellular oxygen consumption, glucose uptake, and ATP production. Methylene blue and red light therapy for dementia. When it comes to therapies for diseases of the brain, two stand out among the crowd as most promising. Methylene blue and red light therapy are two widely studied approaches for improving brain mitochondrial respiration due to their ability to act directly on cellular metabolism and correct deficiencies therein. Red light and methylene blue have similar beneficial effects on mitochondrial function, oxidative damage, inflammation, and subsequent behavioral symptoms. In a 2020 review reports, combining methylene blue with red light therapy in a treatment protocol for dementia appears to be a promising technique for synergetically maximizing therapeutic potency and accelerating recovery of metabolically deficient brain cells. Cognitive enhancement, a brain-boosting powerhouse. It wasn't until about 100 years after discovering methylene blue that scientists began realizing its immense potential to improve brain function. A 1970s animal study revealed improved memory in rats after ingesting the substance. Further explorations into the effects of the methylene blue on the brain didn't occur until many decades later. Once they began, reports coming out were every bit as promising, even in humans. In recent years, methylene blue has gained popularity among self-hackers and neurotropic enthusiasts as a brain-boosting compound used to enhance cognition. The tendency of this dye to quickly cross the brain-blood barrier and concentrate inside the brain makes it a perfect candidate for therapy to enhance brain function. Once inside, methylene blue improves mitochondrial efficiency and protects brain cells from damage through the antioxidant functions, resulting in improved memory, mood, and overall cognition. A single oral dose improves memory and attention. Dr. Timothy Dong and his colleagues at the University of Texas Health Science Center conducted the very first human study investigating the impacts of methylene blue on memory and attention, spanned in 2016. The randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial administered an oral dose of 0.5 to 4 milligrams per kilogram of methylene blue to 26 healthy participants between the ages of 22 and 62 to determine if the substance could increase brain activity and improve performance in memory and attention-related tasks. Participants underwent functional magnetic resonance imaging before and 1 hour after low-dose methylene blue or placebo was administered to evaluate the effects of methylene blue on the cerebrovascular activity during tasks. The study found that a single oral dose of methylene blue improved both short-term memory and attention span in participants. Methylene blue was also associated with a 7% increase in correct responses during memory retrieval. The study reports, this work certainly provides a foundation for future trials of methylene blue in healthy aging, cognitive impairment, dementia, and other conditions that might benefit from drug-induced memory enhancement. Methylene blue increases mitochondrial complex 1 through 3 function. One of the hallmarks of dementia, as mentioned previously, is reduced mitochondrial complex 4, the activity of which can be enhanced by using methylene blue. But what about complexes 1 to 3? This has been studied. Methylene blue significantly increases mitochondrial complexes 1 through 3 activity in isolated mitochondria and enhances oxygen consumption and glucose uptake. Methylene blue targets all 4 complexes in its mitochondrial respiratory chain, which explains the brain-boosting benefits of this remarkable therapeutic dye. Nitric oxide accelerates cognitive decline. Methylene blue prevents it. One final mechanism for the cognitive benefits of methylene blue is that reducing nitric oxide in the brain has been found to be protective against cognitive decline. Overall, our findings suggest that the lack of nitric oxide release via and NOS may protect animals to some extent against aging-associated cognitive decline in memory tasks. Methylene Blue is a nitric oxide inhibitor, maintains effective cellular metabolism in brain cells, protecting the brain from dementia and age-related decline. Number 6. Depression no more. More than 2 million... Number 6. Depression no more. More than 264 million individuals worldwide currently suffer from clinical depression, but these are only the officially diagnosed numbers. The truth is, we all suffer from bouts of depression at different points in our lives. So wouldn't it be useful to understand what is happening inside the body during depression and how to take care of the problem? Most people with depression are prescribed SSRI drugs, but with an endless list of serious side effects such as weight gain, insomnia, sexual dysfunction, emotional detachment, drowsiness, anxiety, restlessness, agitation, tremors, headaches, blurred vision, mania, psychosis, hallucinations, suicide, and homicidal ideation. Isn't it safe for us to say that they don't work? Unbeknownst to the public, scientists have known for many years that the root cause of depression is not a deficiency of the neurotransmitter serotonin. The serotonin hypothesis is wrong. The serotonin hypothesis of clinical depression has been around for more than 50 years and claims that serotonin deficiency is the cause of depression. This hypothesis is the backbone to the entire line of SSRI drug treatments used by millions of people worldwide. But there's a problem. The serotonin hypothesis has never been proven. In fact, the idea that inadequate serotonin causes depression is so far from reality that in 2015 review, scientists called the serotonin hypothesis a conspiracy theory pushed by drug manufacturers to sell drugs to gullible public. Dogged by unreliable clinical biochemical findings and the difficulty of relating changes in serotonin activity to mood state, the serotonin hypothesis eventually achieved conspiracy theory status, whose avowed purpose was to enable industry to make selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors to a gullible public. The pharmaceutical industry is duping anybody taking serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRI drugs, and their health and quality of life likely decreased solely for financial gain. Hopefully the new paradigm on depression and its solutions that I'm about to offer have an antidepressant effect on you after that last point. Serotonin, molecule of aggression, depression, and stress. Would it surprise you if I told you the happy hormone, serotonin, is not a hormone at all, or that serotonin is involved in causing depression? How about if I said that people with cancer had elevated serotonin? The failed serotonin hypothesis suggests that serotonin is not involved in making people feel happy. It is a long list of serious side effects tells us that it's working in ways not conducive to health. So long as billions of dollars are made selling SSRI drugs, then the evening news, unfortunately, will never broadcast the case against them. This makes you wonder how long it'll take before the world realizes serotonin is, in fact, what Ray Peat calls a damage-induced inflammatory mediator, involved in aggression, depression, and stress. Reserpine is an ancient tranquilizer derived from a plant used in India for centuries. It has a powerful tranquilizing action, has been used to treat hypertension, and was found to be an antidepressant. It lowers the concentration of serotonin in the brain and other tissues. Dr. Raymond Peat. The role of stress in depression. For many decades, stress has been known to trigger symptoms of depression. In January 2021, United States and Chinese researchers collaborated on a study published in the journal Translational Psychiatry, which investigated adolescent depression using non-human primate stress-induced models of depression. The monkeys faced stressors such as water deprivation, fasting, space restrictions, cold stress, strobe light, inescapable foot shocks. The study confirmed that chronic and unpredictable mild stressors could induce depressive-like and anxiety-like behavior while increasing the stress hormone cortisol and reducing metabolic rate. 3 primary biological consequences of stress in a study include stress caused depression and anxiety, stress increased stress hormone cortisol, stress reduced metabolic rate. There is no doubt that our modern lives are riddled with mild chronic stressors, and at times, severe chronic stressors.
and these stressors are contributing to the epidemic of depression in ourselves and the people around us. The study I presented above brings us full circle to what can be declared as the primary cause of depression. Depression is a metabolic disease. The brain is unique in that it's strictly dependent on glucose to meet its metabolic energy needs. It's also unique because relative to other parts of the body, the brain requires proportionally far more energy for its weight than the rest of the body. While the brain typically makes up around 2% of a person's weight, it consumes around 20% of the body's energy, and that's when at rest. While reading, exercising, or performing any cognitively demanding activity, brain cells consume far more energy. In fact, the brain consumes 10 times the rate of energy per gram of tissue than the rest of the body. When glucose, being the major fuel for brain cell metabolism, is in short supply, the energy supply to the brain is quickly cut off. It's in this metabolically depressed state that a person begins experiencing all the feelings and behaviors and signs and symptoms of depression. In 2017, a study published in PLOS 1 shows an association between poor metabolic health and depression. In a large, diverse cohort of adults studied in 2018, the presence of depression was associated with dysfunctional metabolic health. Scientific explorations into depression have taken us a long way, disproving the false serotonin hypothesis and bringing us to what is becoming increasingly a more established and obvious as time goes on. Depression is a metabolic disorder. We see an unexpected link between cellular energetics and a major depression, which has always been seen as a mood disorder, states Professor Finley, a professor of molecular psychiatry at the University of Oxford, UK. Why depression is more common in women than in men. Harvard Medical School reports that women are about twice as likely as men to develop major depression. This finding was based on a large-scale 2017 study that found these gender differences in depression began at age 12, with girls and women being twice as likely as men to experience depression. But even the prestigious Harvard University doesn't offer much in the way of reasons why women are more prone to depression, stating, "It remains unclear why a gender gap exists in depression. Step aside, Harvard, and let the independent health researcher offer some clarity on the issue." The reason why depression is more common in women than in men is the same reason why migraine headaches are 2 to 3 times more prevalent in women, or why autoimmune diseases are as much as 10 times more prevalent in women. Women have higher levels of estrogen. It's no coincidence that as estrogen levels peak during a woman's menstrual cycle around days 22-24, the prevalence of depression has been found also proportionally increase. Here are 4 specific biological pathways that help explain why depression is more common in women than in men. 4 ways estrogen causes depression. Estrogen increases serotonin. One consequence of estrogen exposure. Number 1. Estrogen increases serotonin. One consequence of estrogen exposure is that it increases the production of serotonin. These results suggest that estrogen may increase the capacity for serotonin synthesis, concluded researchers from the University of Washington. Estrogen increases cortisol. In 2007, study investigating the impacts of taking oral estrogen on 37 women, serum concentrations of the stress hormone cortisol were found to be 67% higher than in control subjects. Cortisol is a hormone of stress and stress causes depression. Estrogen suppresses thyroid. Estrogen causes increased levels of polyunsaturated free fatty acids to circulate in the bloodstream. Polyunsaturated fatty acids suppress the immune system, inhibit cellular respiration, and powerfully suppress thyroid function. The end results of estrogen-induced hyperthyroidism are the inability of cells to oxidize glucose and a lower metabolic rate, which have been linked directly to depression. Estrogen increases nitric oxide. Estrogen is well known to induce nitric oxide production via activation of the enzyme nitric oxide synthesis, and it turns out nitric oxide plays a critical role in depression. Nitric oxide is central to depression. To truly understand depression, it's necessary to step back from the cultural beliefs surrounding serotonin and neurotransmitters and look at a larger biological picture. Why the public, medical doctors, some scientists, and even naturopaths are taught to see nitric oxide through a one-dimensional lens as a factor for greater blood flow in the brain and body, they fail to realize that low concentrations of nitric oxide are neuroprotective and mediate physiological signaling, whereas higher concentrations mediate neuroinflammatory actions and are neurotoxic. While nitric oxide is increased in the brain and body, increased also are two different free radicals: reactive nitrogen species and reactive oxygen species. This results in greater production of pro-inflammatory cytokines. Nitric oxide is responsible for initiating the high levels of inflammation commonly found in depressed people, brain on fire. Based on these findings, we should expect depressed people to have higher nitric oxide levels than non-depressed people. This research has been done in rats and humans with major depressive disorders. Plasma nitric oxide levels were significantly decreased both in male CUS rats and in male MDD patients. In another study, the severity of psychomotor retardation seen in people with major depression was significantly correlated to serum nitric oxide levels. Nitric oxide inhibitors as antidepressants. In recent years, nitric oxide inhibitors have been studied as antidepressants. Targeting nitric oxide appears to be a far more promising target for treating depression than serotonin or other neurotransmitters, since nitric oxide regulates neurotransmitter expression and the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines. In rats, inhibiting nitric oxide has antidepressant-like effects in forced swimming test, which means it helped them maintain hope and continue to swim, instead of giving up and drowning. If you think of life as a kind of forced swimming test, it means these results could be very applicable to our modern times. All things prior in this section have led us to Methylene Blue, the star of the show, a drug known for its ability to potently inhibit nitric oxide production in numerous ways, which have been used in psychiatry for over a century. Methylene Blue, a cure for depression? Scientists gave severely depressed patients one dose of Methylene Blue daily for 3 weeks, and improvement in patients receiving Methylene Blue was significantly greater than those receiving a placebo. Remarkably, the scientific improvements were achieved in the patients at a minute dose of only 15 milligrams a day. Methylene Blue for bipolar disorder. Formerly called manic depression, bipolar disorder is a mental health condition that causes extreme mood swings that include emotional highs and lows. Methylene Blue has been put to the test on patients with bipolar disorder. Beginning in the 1980s, more trials have occurred in recent years as interest in this viable medicine is rekindled. A 2-year trial on 31 bipolar patients compared 300 milligrams a day of Methylene Blue with 15 milligrams a day of Methylene Blue in 1986. All patients were also treated using lithium. Of the 17 patients that completed the 2-year trial, they were significantly less depressed when on 300 milligrams of Methylene Blue compared to 15 milligrams. The 300 milligrams a day dose was said to be a useful addition to lithium in a long-term treatment of manic depressive psychosis. It's important to note that taking lithium, the standard treatment for bipolar at the time, can come with serious potential consequences like tremors, acne, nausea, excessive salivation, weight gain, memory defects, kidney failure, a 6-fold increase of hyperthyroidism, and abnormally large production of urine. I think it's safe to say the improvements in patients in the study mentioned above would probably have been more significant if they also hadn't been taking lithium. Dalhousie University in Halifax, Canada, was a launch pad of a 2017 study that tested the bipolar drug lamotrigine used in conjunction with Methylene Blue. Patients took lamotrigine with Methylene Blue at the dose of either 15 milligrams or 195 milligrams for 3 months, then switched to the other dose of Methylene Blue for 3 more months. The treatment involving 195 milligrams of Methylene Blue improved residual symptoms of depression and anxiety in patients with bipolar disorder, concluded the researchers. Several of the patients in the study liked Methylene Blue so much that they continued using it after the study was complete. Methylene Blue eliminates negative feelings about the past. One of the most unique and fascinating brain benefits of Methylene Blue is its ability to release negative feelings associated with past situations, allowing the user to retain the positive aspects of those events and move on from the fears of trauma. In the scientific world, they call this fear extinction. In the real world, the people who need these kinds of therapies have post-traumatic stress disorder. I realize this topic drifts slightly from the subject of depression. Still, there's definitely some overlap between depression and how people with post-traumatic stress disorder experience the world, which is why I've decided to include it. In 2014, scientists administered methylene blue to people with a marked fear of claustrophobia to determine if it could help it distinguish their fears. For the study published in the American Journal of Psychiatry, studies were crammed inside tiny, dark chambers 6 times for 5 minutes each time, followed immediately by the administration of either methylene blue, 260 milligrams, or a placebo. They repeated the process 1 month later and assessed the level of fear in the participants. The study found that the participants who had successful exposure sessions, fairly low levels of fear after spending time in enclosed chambers, had even lower levels of fear the second time around if they received methylene blue. Interestingly, patients who had unsuccessful exposure sessions, high levels of fear after spending time in enclosed chambers, fared worse on follow-up after receiving methylene blue. The results of this study were a little less satisfying than I had hoped, but still, in some ways, promising. Methylene blue enhances memory and the retention of fear extinction when administered after a successful exposure session, but may have a deleterious effect on extinction when administered after an unsuccessful exposure session, concluded researchers. More recent studies use methylene blue for fear extinction have reported positive effects in preventing fear reinstatement in certain subgroups of animals. A 2017 randomized controlled trial in humans with chronic post-traumatic stress disorder found that methylene blue, in addition to imaginary exposure therapy, imagining yourself holding that king cobra snake you fear, successfully accelerated fear extinction recovery in patients with chronic post-traumatic stress disorder. This section was so vast that I cleared a summary of all the information included before we move on. Below are the findings from the most recent review of methylene blue for brain disorders in an easy-to-digest, point-form fashion. A 2019 review of methylene blue for neuropsychotic disorders reports methylene blue has an antidepressant, analoxic, and neuroprotective properties. Methylene blue has a stabilizing effect on mitochondrial function. Particularly promising results have been obtained in both short and long-term treatment of bipolar disorder. Methylene blue is effective for psychotic and mood disorders and can help with fear extinction. Number 7. A hope for autism. The other day, my sister sent me a text message saying her friend's daughter was on the autism spectrum, which inspired me to investigate autism and include a section about it in this book. My goal was to learn what autism is and determine if methylene blue therapy can help people with autism. Autism prevalence rising exponentially. Autism is the fastest growing development disability in the United States. If that's not concerning enough, then here are a couple more alarming facts. 1. Autism is mostly diagnosed in children. And 2. Its prevalence has been increasing exponentially for the past 50 years. The following chart illustrates the statistics on autism prevalence between the year of 1975 and 2009. In 1975, there was about 1 in 5,000 cases of autism. In 2009, there was about 1 in 110. As you can see, in 1975, 1 in 5,000 children were diagnosed with autism, which is not many at all. It was a rare disorder then. But just 10 years later, that figure doubled to 1 in 2,500, and by 1995, the number skyrocketed to 1 in 500. In 2001, autism prevalence was 1 in 250 children, and in 2009, the last year of data available at the time the graph above was created, prevalence of autism was 1 in 110 children. I wish I could say that's where these numbers stopped climbing, but statistics show that cases have continued their exponential climb since then. Autism prevalence released by the CDC for the year 2020 pegs rates among children at 1 in 54 children in the United States. To put it into perspective, we've gone from 1 in 5,000 children with autism in 1975 to 1 in 54 children in 2020. Why isn't anyone solving the disaster? Fuck it. I'll do it. Let's go. Symptoms of autism. We're all born with greatness inside us, but because of the crippling social effects seen in people with autism, children or adults with the disease fail to forge the relationships and cognitive capacity needed to live in a way that's fulfilling to themselves and has a positive impact on others around them. Symptoms of autism include avoidance of eye contact, not working or playing well with others, absence of facial expressions, avoidance of physical contact, confusion regarding their own emotions and the emotions of others, general distress when being around other people. There's no way we can have a healthy, functioning society with a large percent of the population walking around with these kinds of social issues. People with autism generally are unable to take care of themselves, which means when a child has autism, their parent and all caregivers for the remainder of their lives must spend virtually every waking moment taking care of them. The impact of this on individual lives, families, and society is probably more significant than we can imagine. And it means that when one individual suffers from autism, we all suffer. Understanding the true nature of the disease and how to eliminate it would be a priceless gift for countless lives in humankind. I'm here to bring you a message of hope for autism. There's a good chance Methylene Blue will one day be crowned the ultimate therapy for the autism spectrum disorder in people of all ages, genders, and races. Autism, a metabolic disorder? According to the World Health Organization, there's probably many factors that make a child more likely to have autism spectrum disorder, including environmental and genetic factors. Well, fair enough, but it's 2021. If astronauts could land on the moon over 50 years ago, why the hell can't the medical industry come up with a therapeutic intervention to heal autism? Instead, mainstream sources tell us there's no cure for autism spectrum disorder. There's currently no medication to treat it. By now, we know that Methylene Blue rapidly and in many different ways helps correct dysfunctional metabolism within all cells and tissues of the body. The question that needs to be asked is whether there's a relationship between autism disorder and metabolic dysfunction. Looking at the existing scientific literature to find out, I discovered that evidence has been mounting for decades suggesting that autism spectrum disorder is a metabolic disease. In 2010, scientists at the University of California, Davis, published a landmark study that found children with autism are far more likely to have deficits in the ability to produce cellular energy than healthy children. The various dysfunctions we measure are probably even more extreme in brain cells, which rely exclusively on mitochondria for energy, said Isaac Pessa, director of the Center for Children's Environmental Health and Disease Prevention, a UC Davis Mind Institute researcher and professor of molecular biosciences at UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. One thing known to occur when cellular mitochondrial metabolism fails within cells is free radical electrons begin leaking from the respiratory chain, causing damage to intracellular components and organelles, including the mitochondria themselves. This explains why Govilli and her colleagues found that hydrogen peroxide levels in autistic children were twice as high as children who did not have autism. As a result, the cells of those with autism were exposed to higher oxidative stress, which is one of the hallmarks of the disease. The real challenge now is to try and understand the role of mitochondrial dysfunction in children with autism, Pesha said. For instance, many environmental stressors can cause mitochondrial damage. The role of lipopolysaccharide in autism. One phenomenon that has been powerfully linked to autistic children is gut disorders. In 2020, a study by scientists at Duke University, Eastern Virginia Medical School, and Ohio State University found that increased severity of autism syndromes was associated with more severe constipation, stomach pain, and other gut difficulties. In autism, we wonder if the gut problems children experience are a core part of their disease itself, or whether they're brought on by other symptoms that children with autism experience, said the study's lead author, Payal Chakraborty. These scientists don't appear to understand the link between gut issues and autism, so I'll offer a very important theory that I first encountered while reading the works of Dr. Raymond Peat. Endotoxin, chemically known as lipopolysaccharide, is a poison produced by gram-negative bacteria in the gut. I maintain that excess production of endotoxin in autistic children is one of the most foundational reasons for the metabolic dysfunction seen in autism. My goal here is to keep things brief, so I'm presenting some important evidence in support to the endotoxin theory of autism to give you a window into some of the research. Endotoxin injections induce inflammation and lesions in the white matter of the fetal brain. Endotoxin promotes nitric oxide production and causes neuroinflammation and cognitive impairment. Endotoxin induces a depressive symptom characterized by the inability to feel pleasure, anorexia, and reduced locomotor, exploratory, and social behavior. This syndrome has been so well established that scientists have coined the term endotoxemia to describe it. Mercury and other heavy metals synergize with endotoxin and increase damage. Endotoxin decreases glutathione levels, making it more difficult for the body to detoxify heavy metals. On the main page of their website, microballoninfluence.com lists the many shocking similarities between autism spectrum disorder and lipopolysaccharide poisoning related to the brain, emotions and behavior and digestive issues, immune function, and more. Autism and endotoxin poisoning are virtually identical. This means that potentially the dramatic improvements in children with autism may result after removal of endotoxins from their guts. How to reduce endotoxin? To reduce endotoxin production in the gut, you must first understand how endotoxin is formed. Here's how it works. Anytime food that your body cannot digest is consumed, that food sits in the gut and provides food for bacteria. After bacteria consume it, endotoxin is produced and excreted as a byproduct of bacterial metabolism. That endotoxin then wreaks havoc on the gut lining, causing all the gut problems that autistic children experience as a core of the disease. The endotoxin then makes its way into the bloodstream and into the tissues of the brain and body, negatively affecting every cell which it interacts. The ideal amount of endotoxin in the body is 0. The less, the better. So how can we stop or slow its production? Well, there are 2 ways to reduce endotoxin production in the gut. Reduce or eliminate consumption of the foods that promote endotoxin production. Ingest antibiotic foods, such as foods, drugs, or other substances to kill the bacteria so they cannot convert fiber and starch into endotoxin. Eliminate endotoxin-producing foods. Foods that are good food for bacteria are all the ones that the human gut can't digest. Fiber, cellulose, and starches are primarily corporates and can be found in raw plants, beans, grains, potatoes, and other starches. After years of experimentation, I definitely think these foods can be a part of a healthy diet. But in a child with autism, it's probably wise to remove them from the diet entirely during recovery. For those who enjoy eating raw salads, I thought I would mention that cooking vegetables well before eating them is a great way to break down the undigestible cellulose inside them, which reduces the endotoxin production and also makes them more digestible and nutritious. Arguably. Endotoxin defeating foods and drugs. The second way to prevent endotoxin production is to take antibacterial drugs or other substances that eliminate the bacteria from the gut. By using this strategy, anytime you consume fibrous foods, you are wiping out the bacteria that would normally convert fiber into endotoxin. The antibiotic minocycline, for example, has been shown to protect against lipopolysaccharide-induced cognitive impairment. Carrots are another example. Carrots produce their own mild antibiotics to combat the bacteria and other microorganisms living in the soil in which they grow. In an article by endalldisease.com called "A Raw Carrot a Day Keeps the Doctor Away," I discussed some scientific research showing the benefits of a raw carrot on the gut. One vegetable has a special place in a diet to balance the hormones, and that is the raw carrot. It is so nearly indigestible that, when it's well chewed or grated, it helps to stimulate the intestine and reduce the reabsorption of estrogen and the absorption of bacterial toxins. In these effects on the bowel, which improve hormonal balance, a carrot salad resembles antibiotic therapy, except that the carrot salad can be used every day for years without harmful side effects. Many people find that daily use of raw carrot eliminates their PMS, headaches, or allergies. The use of oil and vinegar as dressing intensifies the bowel cleaning effect of the salad. Coconut oil is more germicidal and thyroid promoting than olive oil, but a mixture of coconut oil and olive oil improves the flavor. Lime juice, salt, cheese, and meats can be used to vary the flavor. Dr. Raymond Peet. Methylene Blue, although antibacterial, will be absorbed long before it has a chance to kill endotoxin-producing gut bacteria in the colon, but it can exert rapid neuroprotective effects on the lipopolysaccharide-induced behavioral defects. Red light therapy is also protective against the damage induced by lipopolysaccharide. Activated charcoal is another inexpensive medicine that can be used to wipe out gut bacteria in children with autism. It is highly antibacterial, and its oral consumption has shown to result in a significant reduction in lipopolysaccharide levels in the blood. Contrary to the gut microbiome theory, and companies trying to sell us $20 bottles of probiotics, the ideal situation in the gut appears to be complete sterilization. This explains why rats that live their entire lives with sterile guts maintained through feeding of activated charcoal at every meal were found to live 43% longer than rats with bacteria-populated guts. It also explains why tetracycline and other antibiotics have been found to have powerful anti-tumor properties. Reduced endotoxin production is a mechanism in both cases, which benefits the body by reducing the body's exposure to metabolic inhibiting endotoxins. Autism, the metabolic disease, unraveled. Autism, the metabolic disease, unraveled. Let's take a stroll down memory lane and I'll show you some of the scientific evidence published within the past decade or so linking autism spectrum disorder directly to mitochondrial dysfunction. 2012. One of the medical disorders that has been consistently associated with autism spectrum disorder is mitochondrial dysfunction. 2013. We showed 2 clinical cases of autism spectrum disorder associated to a deficiency of the mitochondrial respiratory chain. 2014. Lactate significantly higher in the brains of children with autism. 2015. Large number of children with autism demonstrate abnormalities in mitochondrial function, as well as gastrointestinal symptoms, and interestingly, GI symptoms are also common in children with mitochondrial disorders. 2016 review. Overall, the findings support the hypothesis that there is an association of autism spectrum disorder with impaired mitochondrial function. Not only is the link between autism and mitochondrial dysfunction overwhelmingly evident at this point, but one of the most recent findings was that the number of autistic children with disputed energy metabolism is actually much higher than previously thought. While it was once believed that around 5% of children with autism has mitochondrial dysfunction, recent research from Columbia University has revealed that actual percentage is as high as 80%. Karen K. Griffiths and Richard J. Levy of the Department of Anesthesiology at the Columbia University Medical Center in New York, USA, reported in 2020 that abnormalities of mitochondrial function could affect a much higher rate of children with autism disorder, perhaps up to 80%. I think researchers will eventually realize metabolic issues are universal in autism spectrum disorder. Targeting cellular mitochondria in autism. The electron transport chain in a series of 4 protein complexes that exist within the membrane of a mitochondria and are responsible for the oxidative phosphorylation, the main method through which ATP is produced. Deficits in the mitochondrial transport chain exist almost universally in autism. For example, in the 2 clinical cases mentioned above, a deficiency in complexes 1, 3, and 4 were found. Remarkably, methylene blue can act as an alternative electron carrier and bypass these defects at any and all of the 4 complexes. Methylene blue significantly increases mitochondrial complexes 1 through 3 activity, and methylene blue increases mitochondrial complex 4 by 30%. As I have shown in my earlier days, one can knock out a whole respiratory chain by cyanide and then restore oxygen uptake by adding methylene blue, which takes the whole electron transport over between dehydrogenases and oxygen. By using methylene blue to restore the mitochondrial complexes, lactate production, glycolysis, is switched off and replaced by the full oxidative phosphorylation glucose into ATP, and the body's primary vasodilator and antioxidant, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide intensifies oxygen uptake and use by cells via the Bohr effect, further enhancing the body's metabolic rate. And in the pursuit of health and healing, a higher metabolic rate means we've reached the summit. The great pain reliever. Pain experiments using methylene blue on prison inmates date back to 1890. An article published by Dr. Paul Ehrlich and Arthur Lettmann in the German medical journal Deutsches Medizin Wissenschaft describes administering a young, mentally ill male prison inmate methylene blue for pain. Remarkably, the researchers found that methylene blue changed the entire state of the nerves. Just a few hours after subcutaneous injection or oral administration of methylene blue, painful inflammation of nerves subsided extraordinarily, often entirely without further injections. Since that study, much research has been done on methylene blue's ability to relieve pain in different affiliations, such as post-operative pain caused by surgery, chronic shooting pain, oral mucositis caused by chemotherapy, arthritis, migraine headaches, or chronic low back pain. We'll explore all of these now. Methylene blue for surgical pain. Surgery to remove hemorrhoids, called hemorrhoidectomy, has been associated with considerable post-operative pain and discomfort. In 2014 trial, doctors tested the impact of injecting methylene blue under the skin surrounding the anus before slicing off the hemorrhoids. Group 1 received injections with anesthesia, marcaine, and saline before surgical dissection, and Group 2 received injections of marcaine and methylene blue. The mean pain scores were significantly lower, and the use of acetaminophen was also significantly less in the methylene blue group during the first 3 days post-operative. The study reports and concluded that methylene blue was useful in reducing the initial post-operative pain of open hemorrhoidectomy. Gross. Methylene blue for chronic neuropathic pain. Chronic neuropathic pain is often described as shooting or burning pain caused by dysfunction of the nervous system as a result of trauma, infection, or restriction in blood supply to tissues. Sometimes it is relentless and severe. Sometimes it comes and goes. In 2015, scientists from the multidisciplinary pain clinic at Uppsala University Hospital in Sweden conducted a clinical trial testing methylene blue on patients with neuropathic pain. 10 patients were randomized to either receive methylene blue or placebo. Results show that within 60 minutes of administration, patients who received methylene blue experienced pain relief, and over the next 48 hours after administration, the decrease in pain was significant. Methylene blue for oral mucositis. Oral mucositis is a common and debilitating side effect of chemotherapy and radiation treatments for cancer that manifests in the form of painful inflammation, ulceration of the mucous membranes in the mouth. In 2021, Carlos J. Roland and his colleagues at the University of Texas gave an oral methylene blue mouth rinse to 281 cancer patients with oral mucositis. Pain scores were reduced from 7.7 to 2.5 after methylene blue oral rinse, and most patients achieved pain control after the first 3 doses. This led researchers to conclude methylene blue oral rinse is an effective and safe treatment for refractory pain from all oral mucositis related to cancer treatment. Methylene blue for arthritis pain. Anyone suffering from arthritis knows how debilitating it is to have slow-moving, painful joints and how much it can affect your overall quality of life. Thankfully, research using methylene blue to treat arthritis is highly promising. In 2018, In a 2018 study at the Wuhan University in China, Li Tang Wang and other team of scientists injected methylene blue into the knee joints of rabbits and analyzed the results. Remarkably, the treatment significantly enhanced the weight distribution and significantly decreased the swelling ratio of the rabbits. The study concluded that methylene blue was effective for relieving arthritis-associated pain and inflammation. Arthritis progression often results in degraded cartilage in the joints, causing increased pain, immobility, and inflammation. It turns out arthritic cartilage discs excrete 10 times as much nitric oxide as non-arthritic cartilage discs, and this excess nitric oxide mediates cartilage degradation. In a 2000 study, Israeli scientists wrote, nitric oxide appears to be the final common inflammation mediator of cartilage degradation. The great nitric oxide inhibiting drug methylene blue was tested to see if it could have preservation effect on the cartilage matrix. The study shows that the addition of methylene blue to the growth medium lowered nitric oxide accumulation and prevented matrix degradation in cultured cartilage discs. Methylene blue for migraine headaches. Increased nitric oxide has been heavily implicated in migraine headaches in research studies. A 2018 review on the subject highlights the role of nitric oxide in headaches and recommends using nitric oxide synthesis inhibitors to treat this disorder. Methylene blue's ability to potently inhibit nitric oxide production and scavenge existing nitric oxide from the body and blood make it a drug of great interest and promise for those in search of evidence-based treatment for migraine headaches. Methylene blue for lower back pain. One of the most remarkable studies ever conducted on lower back pain came from the General Hospital of Armed Police Force in Beijing in 2010. The study showed strong evidence that the injection of methylene blue into a painful disc is safe, effective, and minimally invasive. Method for this treatment of dyscognitive lower back pain, far more effective than any other known treatment for low back pain. Of the 72 patients enrolled in the study, 36 were given a placebo, 36 were given a methylene blue injections directly into the spinal discs experiencing pain. The results show that 36 patients giving methylene blue injections, 19% were completely pain-free, 72% completely pain-free, almost completely pain-free. Said differently, over 90% of the patients experienced total or near total relief. Lower back pain expert Nikolai Bogaduk wrote in an editorial that he sees no lethal flaws in the study and calls it one of the most incredible studies on low back pain treatment ever published. The results he describes as astounding, unprecedented, unrivaled in the history of research into the treatment of chronic dyscognitive lower back pain. Methylene blue could make spinal surgery essentially obsolete and would be worthy of nomination for a Nobel Prize, proclaimed Bodak. In the study, satisfaction rates of the methylene blue treatment group were 91.6%, compared to a dismal 7.7%, 1.68%, and 14.3% respectively in the placebo group. There were no side effects or complications in patients treated with the methylene blue. Intradiscal injection of methylene blue could substantially decrease pain scores and improve function for dyscognitive back pain. It was a conclusion of 2021 meta-analysis on the use of methylene blue for low back pain. The pain-relieving effects of the methylene blue are rapid and profound. As we've seen in this section, the remarkable drug methylene blue appears helpful for many, if not all, types of physical pain. Number 9. A healthier heart. Fundamental to your health and life is the quality of your beating heart and cardiovascular system, which circulates nourishing blood through your vessels to all parts of your body and back again. Some interesting scientific findings have been uncovered in recent years regarding the interactions of nitric oxide, blood vessel quality, and aging of the heart. In elderly patients with hypertension, significantly elevated levels of nitric oxide have been found, which suggests that nitric oxide may affect longevity. In animal studies, scientists have seen it firsthand. Overexpression of the major enzyme that manufactures nitric oxide synthesis, significantly increased mortality. This increased mortality was associated with enlarged hearts, and excess dilation of heart ventricles, as well as high incidences of sudden death caused by bradyarrhythmia, a very slow heart rate below 60 beats per minute. These are some of the harmful things that excess nitric oxide can do to your cardiovascular system, and what nitric oxide inhibiting substances like methylene blue can help remedy. For example, give an old rat a nitric oxide inhibitor, and it can promote relaxed, more youthful blood vessels. Aging-associated vascular oxidative stress is partially reversed by pharmacological nitric oxide inhibitors, wrote Johns Hopkins Hospital researchers in 2009. This finding was reinforced in human subjects in 2011 when Caroline J. Smith and her fellow scientists from the Department of Kinesiology at Pennsylvania State University discovered increased in nitric oxide expression in blood vessels of hypertensive patients. Administering a nitric oxide inhibitor restored the vasodilation in hypertension human patients. Oh no. Peroxynitrate. What is it about nitric oxide that causes the stiff vessels, enlarged heart, and cardiovascular dysfunction seen in animals and humans? One of the mechanisms talked about in the research is the increased production of a potent toxic chemical derived from the reaction between nitric oxide and oxygen called peroxynitrate. Peroxynitrate is a toxic free radical that's harmful to cellular lipids, genetic materials, and proteins. Scavenging the peroxynitrate using antioxidants can restore endothelium-dependent dilation of arteries, and therefore, contrary to what the many proponents of nitric oxide believe, the scientific evidence teaches us that increased nitric oxide constricts blood vessels, and lowering nitric oxide by inhibiting can actually restore vascular dilation in blood vessels. Oh, gotta take a break. Oh no, peroxynitrite. What is it about nitric oxide that causes the stiff vessels, enlarged heart, and cardiovascular dysfunction seen in animals and humans? One of the mechanisms talked about in the research is the increased production of a potent toxic chemical derived from the reaction between nitric oxide and oxygen, called peroxynitrite. Peroxynitrite is a toxic free radical that is harmful to cellular lipids, genetic material, and proteins. Scavenging the peroxynitrite using antioxidants can restore endothelium-dependent dilation of arteries. And therefore, contrary to what many proponents of the nitric oxide believe, the scientific evidence teaches us that increased nitric oxide constricts blood vessels, and lowering nitric oxide by inhibiting can actually restore vasodilation in aged blood vessels. The role of endotoxins in heart disease. In this section of this chapter on autism, you learned about the bacterial-derived poison called endotoxin. It's important to mention that the ubiquitous poison is one of the leading contributors, not just to the pathology of autism, but to virtually all metabolic diseases, including cardiovascular disease. In a study from 2000, when scientists injected lipopolysaccharides into rats, they witnessed levels of inosor. Next, they injected methylene blue into the rats to see if it would be protective. The results speak for themselves. The induction of inos was completely eliminated in the presence of methylene blue. Endotoxin lipopolysaccharide is one potent way to activate the cytokine storm inos produces in the cardiovascular system, which leads to coronary heart disease, report scientists McCann, Mastroni, De Lutis, and Rettori in their 2005 review titled The Nitric Oxide Theory of Aging Revisited. MB supplements is highly protective Methylene Blue supplementation is highly productive of cardiovascular function in disease and aging. Through its actions as a nitric oxide inhibitor and antioxidant, Methylene Blue can prevent both the formation of new peroxynitrites and scavenge existing peroxynitrites, which have been implicated in the disease and aged heart. Heart damage is common in patients with diabetes, and if Methylene Blue is, in fact, protective to the heart, we should expect improved cardio function in diabetic patients given Methylene Blue. When doctors administer Methylene Blue to a 66-year-old diabetic woman after suffering a heart attack, she made a full and rapid recovery following the introduction of Methylene Blue infusion. Romanian scientists showed us in 2017 that Methylene Blue improves heart health by enhancing mitochondrial respiration and decreasing oxidative stress. And since we've touched on the subject of diabetes, Methylene Blue has shown to prevent diabetes, restore eye health in patients with diabetes, and lower blood sugar in diabetes animal studies. In other words, both cardiovascular disease and diabetes are metabolic disorders, and their root cause can be influenced positively by Methylene Blue. Methylene Blue versus cancer. The metabolism of cancer cells varies significantly from normal cells. Normal cells oxidize glucose with their mitochondria, and cancer cells rely on the fermentation of sugar. However, once sugar is depleted from the bloodstream, and sugar stores are depleted from the liver, cancer cells begin consuming fatty acids and proteins. Cancer is metabolic disease characterized by the inability of cells to oxidize glucose inside their mitochondria. The switch from normal cell metabolism to cancer cell metabolism is called the Warburg effect, which was first documented over 90 years ago by the 2x Nobel Prize-winning German scientist Otto Heinrich Warburg. What cancer isn't? The idea that when somebody is diagnosed with cancer, we must kill the cancer before the cancer kills them, is a deadly and unscientific mythology that results in the unnecessary suffering and death of millions of people. Only if a cancer cell or tumor is viewed as some kind of monster-like creature that's hell-bent on killing patients can the knives, poison injections, and ionizing radiation be justified as treatments. Yet the mythology of what I'd like to call angry cancer cell is so perverse in society that most medical doctors, scientists, and the general public believe that it is fact. This is probably why Dr. Dean Berkey, who worked closely with Dr. Warburg for many years, said the American Cancer Society, they lie like scoundrels. Or why the co-discoverer of DNA, Dr. James Watson, said, the American public is being sold a nasty bill of goods about cancer. For over 100 years, it has been known that cancer is not a genetic disease, but rather a disease of damaged metabolism For over 100 years, it has been known that cancer is not a genetic disease, but rather a disease of damaged metabolism within cells. With the proper interventions, cancer cells can revert back to normal cells, no killing necessary. The new metabolic cancer treatment paradigm. For decades, scientists have been churning out evidence showing cancer cells' metabolism can be restored to normal cell metabolism. The only reason the public isn't aware of this information is that the predominant cancer treatments of today, surgery, chemotherapy, and radiotherapy, generate far too much profit for the industry to admit the truth. If the cancer industry admitted this information publicly, it would put itself out of business, forfeiting $126 billion in annual revenue. All that's left to leave the disease of cancer behind us forever is revenue. All that's left to leave the disease of cancer behind us forever is for the public to read and understand the information written in the book, Cancer, the Metabolic Disease Unraveled. The book references over 30 studies showing cancer cells transform back into normal cells. In one study, scientists put mitochondria from cancer cells into normal cells and observed the normal cells transform into cancer cells. When they put the mitochondria from the normal cells into the cancer cells transformed back into normal cells. In 1995, researchers from Ohio State University stated, our data suggests quite strongly that non-malignant tumor population can be converted to a more malignant phenotype without additional mutations taking place, and conversely, malignant populations can be downregulated to a non-tumorigenic phenotype. Before looking at methylene blue as a treatment for cancer, I'd like to outline the critical role that nitric oxide plays in its formation progression and metastasis. Once the havoc wrought by nitric oxide is understood, methylene blue's value for cancer and other diseases become clear. Nitric oxide is central to cancer. One way to turn a healthy cell into a cancer cell is to expose it to environmental pollutant nitric oxide. My book, The Cancer Industry, explains how nitric oxide can induce carcinogens, tumor growth, and cancer metastasis. Below, I elucidate 3 ways nitric oxide can trigger carcinogens. Nitric oxide inhibits cytochrome C oxidases. The enzyme cytochrome C oxidase plays a critical role in healthy mitochondrial metabolism. It interacts directly with oxygen and catalyzes the final step in oxidative phosphorylation. Expose this essential respiratory enzyme to nitric oxide and it becomes inhibited. By binding directly to the cytochrome C oxidase, nitric oxide flips the metabolic switch from mitochondrial respiration to aerobic glucose, aka cancer. Only 2 known interventions are capable of dissociating nitric oxide from cytochrome C oxidase and restoring its function: red light therapy and methylene blue. Nitric oxide promotes tumor growth and angiogenesis. When metabolism within a cell fails, free radical electrons begin escaping from the respiratory chain, causing damage to the interior contents of the cell, including the mitochondria. This explains why higher levels of the reactive oxygen species, free radicals, can be found in the cancer cells, and why restoring metabolic function can significantly lower the level of reactive oxygen species generated by the cell. The mitochondria becomes injured and dysfunctional. When mitochondria become injured and dysfunctional, they require repair or replacement. Cells become cancerous because their cellular machinery required to produce energy oxidatively becomes damaged, and no other choice exists but to revert to the primitive glycolytic metabolic phenotype of a single cell organism. It's like firing up a small backup generator to provide electricity for your whole home. Despite this, the cancer industry and governments maintain that a cancer cell has undergone a Frankenstein-like genetic mutation and suddenly has a thirst for blood. An amazing yet dangerous fairy tale. My main point here is that cancer cells are injured cells, and the breakdown of cellular respiration itself is one way to cause that injury, which is where nitric oxide comes into play. Anytime a tissue has been injured, nitric oxide and other growth factors are released to signal cells to grow and divide to replace damaged tissue. In an individual with cancer, tumor cells also receive the message to grow and divide, which is why nitric acid is a well-known promoter of tumor progression, including angiogenesis, the formation of new vasculature in the area surrounding a tumor. Nitric oxide promotes cancer metastasis. Cancer metastasis occurs when cancer cells break free from the tumor and spread to another part of the body. Cancer metastasis is the prime cause of death for 90% of cancer patients. And cancer metastasizes after a cancer cell has escaped from the initial tumor. Nitric oxide triggers an adhesion of circulating tumor cells onto the body tissue, which is the first step in new tumor formation. If nitric oxide is such a strong promoter of cancer, then we should expect any substance that can reduce the concentration or actions of nitric oxide to be beneficial in cancer. Can methylene blue restore defective mitochondrial function in cancer? Methylene blue therapy for cancer. What could be more promising for cancer than a substance that specifically seeks out and corrects metabolic defects first before anything else? Research on methylene blue for cancer is surprisingly abundant, dating back almost 100 years, and shows us that methylene blue can rapidly oxygenate cancer cells and tumors. The effects of methylene blue on mitochondrial respiration of normal cells are very different than that on tumor cells. E.S. Gunsman-Barron from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland published a study in 1930 in which he states, methylene blue exerts its catalytic power on cells or tissues possessing aerobic glycolysis. This remarkable finding means that methylene blue selectively seeks out cancerous tumor cells and boosts their metabolism while leaving healthy cells unaffected. The closer a cell is to having a tumor cell phenotype, the more potential benefit methylene blue can have. The potential benefits of methylene blue to tumor cells include increased oxygen consumption and ATP energy generation. Different kinds of tumors were used in these experiments: human carcinoma, rat sarcoma, rat adenocarcinoma, and Rous chicken sarcoma, with the same results, namely that there is a definite increase in the oxygen consumption of these tissues in the presence of methylene blue, continued Barron, who suggests that growing tumor cell cultures for several generations in a medium containing methylene blue dye might permanently change those cancer cells back into normal cells. The aerobic glycose seen in cancer cells tells us that they are not receiving everything they need to metabolize properly. Methylene blue can help by correcting the metabolitic deficits in complex 1 through 4. Red light therapy is another way to restore mitochondrial respiration within tumor cells rapidly. The combination of light therapy and methylene blue for cancer, called photodynamic therapy, has become one of the most promising and popular research subjects in recent decades. Photodynamic therapy for cancer. Photodynamic therapy involves the use of light therapy in combination with a photosensitizer, one of which can be methylene blue. Red light therapy and methylene blue share a common mechanism of enhancement of the mitochondrial respiration, which protects and restores the respiration in cells, organs, and body systems. Photodynamic therapy is well known to kill many types of bacteria, parasites, fungi, viruses, and other microorganisms. It has been reported to cause massive cell death of tumor cells. Over the past few decades, research publications on photodynamic therapy for cancer have shot through the roof. Defects in cytochrome C oxidase expression induce a metabolic shift in glucose and carcinogenesis, wrote scientists from the University of Pennsylvania in 2015. Red light can photodissociate nitric oxide from the cytochrome C oxidase enzymes and upregulate their activity and effectively restoring the cancer cell back to a normal cell. While red light therapy primarily targets complex 4, methylene blue exerts its effects on every single complex in the respiratory chain 1 through 4, which is why combining red light therapy and methylene blue dye therapy are so synergetic and powerful. Drinking water or juice containing a few drops of methylene blue, then sitting underneath red light allows you to receive one of the most potent metabolic treatment protocols ever devised. This explains the excitement and skyrocketing publication activity of photodynamic therapy for cancer among the scientific community in recent years. Brazilian scientist Tardivo Giglio Santos de Oliveira and their colleagues in Sao Paulo summed up the potential of methylene blue for cancer when they wrote, "Methylene blue has a potential to treat a variety of cancerous and non-cancerous diseases with low toxicity and no side effects." The methylene blue battery. After ingesting methylene blue and then urinating into a toilet a few hours later, medicine has been added to the medicinal water supply that will help protect people and wildlife from mainly highly toxic contaminants typically found in city water, including pharmaceutical drugs, hormones, herbicides and pesticides, rocket fuel, chlorine, arsenic, lead, fluoride, and other poisons. The same cannot be said for the industrial use of methylene blue. In textile mills using methylene blue to dye fabric, wastewater with high concentrations of methylene blue are created and often added to the environment. Like water, salt, sunlight, or virtually anything else in excess, methylene blue in excess can be detrimental to humans, animals, and the environment. That's why a group of environmentally conscious scientists thought of a brilliant strategy to repurpose a methylene blue rich wastewater produced by textile mills, a methylene blue battery. There's a lot of work to be done on ways to sequester methylene blue out of water, but the problem with a lot of these methods is that they're expensive and generate other kinds of waste products. said lead author Angela Casawarchi from the State University of New York. But what if instead of just cleaning up the water, we could find a way to use it? That's what's really motivated this project, continued Angela. In 2018, Angela and the professor Timothy R. Cook decided to create 2 battery prototypes using methylene blue to see if it would work. Cook and Casawarchi discovered that when dissolved in water, methylene blue is very efficient at storing energy and then releasing it on cue. In fact, their methylene blue battery might be the most efficient non-toxic battery the world has ever seen. The first methylene blue battery the team created operated at near perfect efficiency. After charging and draining the battery 50 times, almost 100% of the electrical energy they put in, they got back out. However, over time, the battery's capacity for energy storage began to drop as molecules of methylene blue became trapped in a membrane critical to the device's function. To solve this, they created a second prototype using a different membrane material that would not absorb molecules of methylene blue as the first battery did. This new prototype had all the efficiencies of the first battery and no longer showed any drop in efficiency after 12 cycles of charging and discharging. Problem solved. The results of their study have established that methylene blue is an exceptional material for liquid batteries, so let it be known